When did you have to lie about an injury because the truth was too humiliating? I once semi-dislocated my kneecap in such a way that my leg locked up and I was in incredible pain. I did this sitting down to eat at the dinner table and twisting my leg somehow, so I hurt myself sitting down. Instead, I told my friends that I'd fallen down a steep hill at a local heathland, but my brother told them the truth and I was promptly mocked. I broke my toe running from a bee. I'm a huge weenie about stinging bugs, so when I got a bee in my hair, I freaked out. I ran towards the house, lost my balance and kicked the concrete steps of my mum's porch and fell backwards. Mum was sitting on the porch and I accidentally backhanded her before crashing to the ground. She was laughing so hard she couldn't help me up, and I was laughing so hard I couldn't get up. I was really embarrassed for a while and just told everyone I tripped. I got over the shame because it was pretty frickin' funny, so I don't lie about it anymore. I was once buttering toast with my face really close to it. I liked the butter to be spread very precisely. Then I sneezed and slammed my head on the counter, effectively knocking myself out. I had to go to the ER to be treated for a concussion. In 3rd grade, I was holding a pencil in my fist, point up. I sneezed and face-planted into it. I'm 24 now, and every once in a while, someone tells me that I have blue ink on my forehead. I then have to tell them that it's actually a scar from stabbing myself in the face mid-sneeze. I can sympathize with you. So, I dislocated my kneecap while tickling my pickle. I lied and said I was falling off my bed when I woke up from a dream. I messed up my knee so bad one drunken wild night with the husband, and now, 12 years later, I have to go upstairs one at a time, and my knee aches with the simplest of weather changes. I really need to get it fixed and actually looked at by a good doctor, but that costs money, and I have more important crap to deal with. A caution to the rest of you: don't do drunken canine-style bedroom stuff and fall off the bed onto the clothes hamper with your hands tied behind your back. I once fell out of bed and cracked my head open on a metal frame. There was blood everywhere, ER visit, stitches and stuff. I was about 6 years old. I still have the scar decades later. My mother literally changed our beds, even though we really couldn't afford to buy safer ones. The truth is, I didn't want to go to bed. So I flung myself out of bed to pretend to be hurt and maybe get to stay up for a short while longer. Well, mission overachieved on your goal there at least. Maybe there's something to be said for not shooting for the moon on every one of life's little endeavors. You should only commit that hard when it comes to things that will help you achieve your long-term goals, perhaps. I was removing facial hair using a remover cream. I ended up leaving it on for too long, which caused burns. I told people I dropped hot noodles on my face instead. I got surgery a few years ago on my knees as I dislodged some loose cartilage to the joint and also torn a bit of my meniscus. At the time, I was playing a ton of ultimate frisbee, so I just told people it was that. It actually happened when I was getting up from a chair. I dislocated my kneecap playing ultimate frisbee and I was embarrassed, so I told people I was sparring MMA. MMA beats ultimate frisbee beats chair. I got a black eye as a kid. I slipped and fell onto the support beam for my basketball rim. My dad made me lie to my other family members and say I got it defending some kids at school. He was pretty embarrassed at how terrible I was at basketball. Was getting hot and heavy with my boyfriend at the time. He reached under my shirt and unhooked my bra, and then pulled my shirt and bra up over my head at the same time. As he did this, the underwire from my cheap bra popped out and left a massive scratch right across my forehead. I made up some story about digging through my closet looking for something and getting scratched by a hanger. I have a 1.5-inch stab wound scar on my left bicep. When I was younger and attractive girls asked me how it happened, I'd tell them that it happened during a fight where someone pulled a knife on me. Actually, I worked in a butcher shop off a market when I was in my late teens. Part of my job was to collect all the carving knives from the prep area, put them into a large plastic bin and carry them behind the deli case to the kitchen to wash. One time coming back out of the kitchen, I failed to notice that somebody had opened the trapdoor to the basement in my direct path. While I was in the kitchen, the plastic bin I was holding was obscuring my view. I took one fateful step, opposite to the stairs side, and tumbled into the basement, with the contents of the bin raining down around me. Somehow, I escaped with only a twisted ankle and the aforementioned stab wound on my arm, for which I had to go to the ER for stitches. I'll always remember being dazed, sitting at the bottom of the stairs, looking up and seeing a meat cleaver embedded in one of the steps. To answer a lot of you, yes, the truth is a far better story than the lie. I'm a middle-aged man now, and I think that I told the knife fight alternative story way back then because it didn't really sink in that I could have died. I thought the truth made me out to be a klutz. As a teen, that seemed like logic. As an adult, I know a lot better. I cut my thumb with an axe. The cut was almost to the bone. I never told anyone because I was told not to play with the axe. This was when I was 6 years old. One time in chemistry, I managed to get a drop of concentrated sulfuric acid on my nose. It was the most physically painful experience of my entire life. I just sat in the back of the classroom, wiping tears out of my eyes silently because it was too awkward to say anything. Next lesson, people asked me what was up with my nose, and I had an awkward time explaining how you get sulfuric acid on your nose. I just itched it like an idiot. I fully took off my nail while playing football, is what I said. I was playing sport, just an intense game of sword fighting on Wii Sport Resort, and I slammed my hand really hard on a table. I have a scar that crosses my left eyebrow. It looks really cool, and I made it during a fight against a man with a knife. At least, that's what I tell everyone, because saying my PlayStation 2 fell on my face because I tried to lift it while not paying attention might sound too stupid. My grandmother noticed a mark on my forehead. It was round and just under an inch in diameter. She asked me what happened. Without missing a beat, I straight up replied with, "I burned my head with my hair straightener." She replied that I should be more careful. What really happened, you may ask? I got my head stuck between the back seat and armrest of a car, resulting in a friction burn, similar to carpet burn, while rooting or getting some or banging or having relations, whatever you want to call it, in the back seat. Nice, right? I was drunk walking home at 4 a.m., crossed a few train tracks and came across a 2-meter-high fence with tiny cylinders on top. I made the jump because I think I can. I fall. After standing up, worrying about my back pain, I look at my arm. My arm was completely torn open, covered in blood because it got stuck on the fence. I came into the ER and the nurse says she's seen shark bites before in Australia and this looked worse. I had 49 stitches and now have a scar from a, quote, shark bite. I once punched a bowling ball because I was frustrated. Turns out bowling balls are pretty hard. Broke my hand, it was swollen and bloody. Told my boss at work that I slammed my hand in a door. It's still broken, this was like 6 months ago. Got drunk, fell on my face on the pavement, said the huge gash on my forehead down to my cheek was from rugby. And to be fair, it was during a rugby social. I have these really ugly shoes that I wear around the house that my husband absolutely hates. I was taking laundry down the stairs and I fell down the stairs because of these same shoes. I couldn't tell him that because then he would be correct that my shoes are stupid, so I told him the dog ran between my legs and made me fall. I was in high school taking my morning shower. It was an older house and the shower was a tiled-in room with a glass door. Being the high school dork that I was, I thought that it would be cool if I ninja elbowed the door open. The whole door spiderweb cracked and one little piece popped out, leaving me with a nice gash on my elbow. My hand slipped, I said. The funny part was that about a week prior, my brother had sliced his hand open in the same shower, trying to open a bottle of shampoo with a pocket knife. Neither of us are very bright. Oh boy, not great genes that you have there. I've literally never had a shower product be in any way remotely difficult to open, so I'm just going to have to put money on your brother not understanding how caps work. And judging by both your stories, that isn't a huge assumption to make. A scar across my forehead. I got it from hitting my head on a fan as a child, and it's still kinda there. I always just say that my cat scratched me and it went pretty deep, therefore the reason it's still there. I haven't exactly lied about it, but depending on who I'm talking to, I've been leaving out some important details. I got my wife an electric scooter for her birthday. The day she got it, we went for a ride. I was on my electric skateboard. It had recently rained a bit, so the pavement was a little wet, but not too bad as long as you were careful. I got the idea to pretend to fart and get a speed boost out of it, so I made a farting noise and totally gunned it. Since the pavement was damp, my board slid out from under me and I went down directly in front of my wife. She didn't have time to stop, so she also fell. We both got some scrapes and bruises. Unfortunately, she got it worse than I did. When telling the story, I've left out the toot boost part of it, if it's someone I'm not really close to. I have been waiting 25 years for this moment. As a 10-year-old boy, my friend had a mini hoop on his closet door in his room. We'd always shoot the ball while playing Super Nintendo or whatever. One day we started shooting and then had a real one-on-one game with dribbling, scorekeeping, and stuff like that. I went for a dunk and didn't realize the closet doorknob was missing and it was just jagged metal jutting out of the door. I remember looking down and seeing my shorts torn open and a bloody gash, and I was in shock. The cut was inches from my man parts. This was a close one. It wasn't bleeding a ton, but I could see fat and other strange stuff. It was a couple of inches long and I was a frickin' idiot 10-year-old, so I got a bunch of bandages from his house and limped home. Neosporin and bandages for weeks until it healed. I never told my parents. I'm not sure why. I have a visible scar to this day. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was out of work for months for this one. Broke my finger and severed the tendon, catching a heavy door to hold it for a cute girl. I was having some trouble with my heart a few months ago that caused dizziness and occasional fainting. Passed out while in the shower and sprained my wrist. I told my co-workers it was a workout injury because I passed out in the shower was a visual I didn't want to give everyone. To be honest, saying you sprained your wrist in the shower isn't a visual you want to give them either. Finally, a story I can share. I was playing football, or soccer, with a bunch of friends. I was 12. Since we were all still school kids, one team was usually going to steamroll the other. On this occasion, I happened to be the keeper on the winning team, so I had nothing to do and I was really bored. I decided it was a good time to do some pull-ups, so I grabbed the crossbar of the goalpost and pulled myself up. Once I was on top, I stuck out my legs for fun and got them stuck in the net. I ended up falling to the ground and stuck out my hands to prevent myself from breaking my tailbone. I eventually found out that I'd broken my left wrist, with one of the bones inside the wrist being pushed out of position and slightly fractured. What I told my parents, and the doctor too, was that I was running after the ball and tripped over something, thus causing me to fall face first and break my wrist. In short, broke my wrist doing a pull-up on a goalpost. Told the parents and the doctor that I tripped while running after the football. I jumped off a 12-foot recreational climbing wall drunkenly to impress a boy and broke both of my legs, putting me in a wheelchair for the rest of summer. When I explained it, it was just abbreviated to, I had a rock climbing accident. I was wasted and fell in the parking lot of my friend's apartment and busted my face wide open at her birthday party. The birthday party just so happened to be the night before a second date with this really cute girl I met on Tinder. So I went to the date and told the girl that a dog at work had knocked me over and I fell on my face. I work with dogs, and me being put on my butt by a Great Dane or some other huge pup isn't unusual, and she understood. While on the date, some guys came up to me and rudely asked me what the frick happened to my face. My Tinder date grabbed my hand and made up some story about how I got in a fight defending her honor at a bar or some nonsense. I could hardly keep a straight face while she was telling the story, but she sold it, I can tell you. It wasn't until a few days later that I told her the real story of how I actually got hurt. Tinder date and I are getting married soon. I poured scalding hot grease into my shoe when working in a kitchen. I had to look my boss dead in the eye and say I was fine because I was scared to get substance tested. I waited 10 minutes to go and investigate the damage so that nothing seemed suspicious. And it was the worst burn I've ever had. I have scars on my knees that I tell everyone I got from a bad fall. It's plausible because I'm very clumsy. In reality, I was doing the deed with a guy on the floor of his bedroom and I got rug burn on my knees from when I was on top. Do you want to know how I got these scars? I broke my eggplant once. Look, I was tired, practically asleep, I was about to jump on my bed to go to sleep, and I missed somehow. I landed on the floor with a chub. It hurt like a motherfricker. I just said I got mugged and hit with a bat. When I was younger, we dismantled one of those plastic football goals and reassembled it into a giant golf club. I was then swiftly hit in the face, causing my cheek to rip open. I had to tell my dad that somebody kicked the football too hard into my face because I didn't want to admit that I was beaten by a homemade plastic rod. I got a second-degree burn on my butt cheeks. My friends stupidly let it slip during a dinner with my mum. I had to quickly lie and say that I was taking a bath and that I didn't check the water, because every human gets into the bathtub butt first, right? I really got the injury from pouring oatmeal, which hadn't cooled down, into the back of a diaper I was wearing. Do I want to know? I'm trying to think of some kind of situation where this isn't a weird bedroom thing, and I'm honestly just coming up blank. Please, supply your theories as to why people are pouring hot porridge into a worn adult diaper, because I can't deal with this level of humanity on a Monday. I threw out my back sneezing. I told people I was moving something heavy because that was less stupid than the truth. Not me, but once I had a friend lie about how they broke their wrist. He was only about 16 at the time, but told everybody that he broke it by falling down the stairs. Turns out his mum walked in on him with his digits inside his partner, and he jerked his arm away in an awkward position, causing the break. An ex-boyfriend and I were once getting busy, and he was repeatedly slapping me in the face while throttling me. Granted, it was a little harder than I prefer. He was also on white snow, and in my experience, people don't always realize how aggressive they're being while on that stuff, but it wasn't unbearable or anything. He suddenly stopped a few minutes later, eyes wide in awe. "Did I do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Your face is all bruised." "Oh, it's fine, I'll look at it later," I said dismissively. Later comes around and I look in the mirror to see a purple handprint outlined across my cheeks. Even the lines of his hands were painted on my face in broken blood vessels. My parents didn't know that I was dating him, and they certainly didn't think that I was doing the deed, especially like that. On my way home, I stopped at Ulta and got color-correcting makeup. I piled it on using the mirror in my car, and wore my hair down and slightly over my face. My parents could still see some bruising though, and when they asked what had happened, I told them this absolute whopper. Well, I was driving home from work and dropped my water bottle. It started to roll as if it was going to get in the way of the brake pedal, so I bent down to grab it. While I was still kind of bent down, a cat ran onto the road and I slammed on the brakes, and I hit my face on the wheel. In short, ex-boyfriend left a handprint bruise on my face. I told my parents and my other friends and family that I hit it on the steering wheel. I broke my wrist in gym class playing kickball when I was 16 or 17. The grass was wet, and the girl on first base was a big and lazy girl, and I was in the shortstop position. So when I saw a kick go straight along the baseline, I knew what to expect. Girl didn't even bend down to try and stop it, just kind of waved one arm at her side. So I was running to try and get to it. I stopped it with one arm, but the grass was super wet and my feet just kept going. I fell down hard and had my left arm behind me to brace the fall. The only cool part of the story is that I finished out the rest of the game with what should have been a very obviously broken wrist. I went to the gym teacher afterwards and asked if I could go to the nurses for an ice pack before getting changed. And he was just like, Oh crap, that's broken. He flagged a kid to escort me to the nurses, and after a bit of walking and going up the stairs and adrenaline wearing off, I went into shock and I fainted. I told everyone in my first few years of college that it happened playing high school soccer instead of gym class kickball. I didn't play soccer in high school. A friend of mine broke his member while rolling over with morning wood on the bed. He got his super hot girlfriend at the time to say that it happened during the deed. This was not the kind you could hide. He was laid up, legs spread open for a month and another 2 before he could walk again. It was 6 months before he was back to normal. His wife, the same girl, just married him. She later told us the truth during a Christmas drinking game. I once gave myself a black eye trying to move one of those heavy boxes or containers of cat litter. I leaned over to pick it up, and unbeknownst to me, it was actually empty instead of the full 35 pounds I was expecting. So I brought it up way faster than expected, and the corner of the container clocked me in the eye. Thankfully, my school and friends know that I'm fairly clumsy as it is, so they didn't even really bat an eye at it once I assured them that it was just clumsiness. A fun tidbit, I've lived in the same house since I was born, and I've fallen down the same stairs I literally learned how to stairs on over 25 times in my life. I'm 18, almost 19 now. In high school, I was just messing around with some friends in the parking lot after school, and I'd jumped off the back end of my friend's car while it was in motion. I landed on my foot really goofily. I either broke a bone in my foot or badly sprained it because I couldn't really walk on it. I didn't want my mum to get mad at me for being an idiot, so I wrapped it up every day for a few months to keep it straight and not hurting. The pain eventually went away, but it was a rough few months that I had to fake not having a limp. My mum never really questioned why I was wearing pants every day for the early summer months, so whatever. My trifluoroacetic acid scar that's about 6 inches by 4 inches on my left forearm isn't a lab accident, as I tell people. I used the acid to cover my self-inflicted scars, which were prolific and noticeable. I got the idea from the hot iron scene in the movie Rush, where Jason Patrick burns off his needle marks. This scar is still incredibly obvious, but it's easily explained away. I never admitted that to anyone. I did it in 1995. I got super mad, and in my stupidity, I punched a wall and broke my hand along with snapping all the tendons in the pinky side of the same hand. To avoid disappointed stares and judging looks, I just said I dropped some furniture on it. Ladies and gentlemen of the night, what was your first day of work like? I started working because I'd gotten a few propositions through a dating website. I was studying med at the time, and I was short on money. So one time, this guy made me what seemed like a lucrative offer, and I agreed. I didn't know how any of it worked, so I told a friend I was going out, and to call or text me in an hour's time. We initially met in a park at night, sat in his very, very nice car, and had a bit of a flirty chat, then made an appointment. He said he was 58 years old, but I think he was about 15 to 20 years older than that. A week or two later, I drove over to his apartment. I was petrified, but I needed the money, so I rang the doorbell. It was a lovely apartment, and he paid up front. He was nice enough. He asked me to do some things that I didn't want to do, so I said, maybe not this time. Kept an eye on the time via the helpful clock radio next to the bed, and thankfully he finished on time. Had a shower, bit of a chat afterwards, and then he kissed me goodbye on the cheek. I think the fact that I said no to one particular act annoyed him a little bit, but he texted later and asked if I'd like to do it again, and with another working girl in the mix. Things proceeded from there. Not sure if this is what you're looking for. I was a different kind of worker, a pro-dom. I'd been selling used undies for the money and thought I'd take it a step further. I decided to find a small private dungeon to rent by the hour and put up an ad online. Being new on the market, I got plenty of inquiries. Other than the first session, I loved the job for so many surprising reasons. I learned so much about how people work and often about myself. But my first pro session was terrible. He was a good client, however, anything that could have gone wrong went wrong, including cracking his rib during a trample session, which is very rare when everything's done correctly. However, I'd never had an issue after that first one and ended up with quite a few wonderful regular clients. For many clients, they'd lived their whole lives keeping their tastes a secret. When first-timers came up to me, I was sometimes the only person they'd ever talked to about this part of their life that they often despised. I was honored to be the person who helped some of these people come to terms with their desires, and often felt more like a counselor than someone working in my particular profession. Never before had I realized how much stigmas can change and ruin a person's life. I'm so much more aware now of the comments I make because you never know what friend or loved one is secretly getting hurt by your words. The narrator can tell that this is going to be one of those videos where he learns a lot about a section of society that he'd normally never even think about or get the chance to talk to. This last story alone was very enlightening, so thanks for writing in. I drank a heap of wine before I went to the agency. This was about 2.5 years ago when the industry was booming. I did booking after booking and went home with a massive wad of cash. I didn't think about it too much. I just loved the rush of being booked and making so much money. The industry is dead over here now, and I really have no idea why. I was an independent worker of the night for 4 years. My first night, I was ridiculously nervous. I went to an upscale hotel, nervously walked through the lobby, hoping I looked like I belonged there and not like what I was really there for. I was nervous the whole elevator ride up to his room. I walked to his room, lightly knocked on the door. He opened the door. For the story's sake, we'll use the name Sarah, and said, "Hi, Sarah?" And like an idiot, I replied with my real name. We laughed it off. It was quick, 10 minutes. He was polite and clean, in the area for business. I ended up seeing him a few more times over the years. It was always very nice. He tipped on top of the hourly rate, which was always appreciated and made me choose to see him over other clients in the future. Most of these guys were family men, bored with their bedroom lives at home and looking for something different. I also saw some guys that were in their 20s and I think just did it for the sake of saying someday that they did it. I also saw quite a lot of weirdos, had to kick some people out of my house, or in one case ran out the door while putting my shirt on, and a good friend of mine who was working with me ran out behind me and dove into the car through a window, just trying to leave that guy's house as quickly as possible. I'm an actively working girl. My first time was only about a month ago. It was through a website where you make offers to pay a girl to go on a date with you. They had to be very clear that it wasn't a working girl website, the stipulations on the website being that you compensated for time. It went over this many times, but the doing of bedroom activities was fairly well implied. My first time was with a 43-year-old married man in town on business. He'd contacted me about a week prior through the website, offering $80 for a date. He said he'd give me $2,000 a month for regular fun if we liked each other. I said yes, and he told me which hotel to meet him at and when. He also told me what to wear. I arrived and he wasn't too bad looking, slender and way more tan than you normally see as far north as I live. He bought me a drink first at the hotel bar and we talked for a bit. I was unbelievably nervous, but he was fairly reassuring. I was sure everyone knew what I was there for, and I was terrified of anyone calling me out. Eventually, he suggested we head up to his room, and I gave the meekest, "Okay," that's ever passed my lips. We went up and sat on the bed and chatted a bit more before he kissed me. After a couple of seconds, he pulled back and said, "I like the way you do that. Let's take off your clothes and see what else you do well." I got undressed and gave him a down-under kiss. I wasn't really expecting him to finish that way, but he did. After he laid back on the bed and indicated that I should join him, we snuggled and talked for a bit more. Eventually, he told me that he thought I was funny and sweet and too good for that, and that he didn't want to see me again in case he formed an emotional attachment. He said he just wanted physical fulfillment, he didn't want to mess things up with his wife. I said that was fine and we talked some more. Eventually, I started putting my clothes back on. I was waiting for him to give me some money, but he wasn't making any moves in that direction, so I sat and talked with him a bit longer. Eventually, I reminded him that we agreed on $80 for the date, and he acted all surprised. Then he made a show of looking for his wallet and then counted out each bill and dropped it on the bed as he did. I took it and left, not accepting his offer to call me a cab. I felt pretty gross. My later experiences were better. Pretty sure the guy was baiting and switching, but offering $80 with the promise of $2,000 per month to lure people in. Then during the first date, he always says he has a change of heart. He did try to meet up again, but said he didn't want to pay for that. I don't know exactly what he was thinking with that, but I pretty much told him to F off. I don't remember much about the entire 6 or so years I was in the business. The whole reason I got into working as a call girl was because I have a traumatic brain injury that causes memory loss and dissociative episodes, and I wasn't receiving treatment for it at the time. Every day, all my life up until recently, has been a struggle to appear normal. There's only one job where you're only required to appear normal for 1 or 2 hours a day, and that's an escort service. Also, I grew up in a cult. My first job was a private client, and I was totally calm on my way there, and during, it wasn't until after I got into a cab to go home that I started crying. I wasn't even upset, it was just involuntary. A month later, I joined an agency. My first night, they gave me this guy who became my first regular. He always booked half an hour, and I never stayed longer than 10 minutes. The other job of the night was in an office in an old industrial estate. 2 very married men and 1 other escort. She was really nice and reassuring, and helped me get over the initial embarrassment. The rest of the night was just sitting in the car with my driver, talking about World War II and listening to Frank Sinatra. Most of the time I even had fun, but I still always get butterflies on the drive there. I think it was the anticipation of not knowing who the guy was. They could be sincerely nice or they could be a complete jerk. A few people have been asking about my education. I'm a med student in one of the more expensive parts of London. UK student loans are based on household earnings. My family are quite wealthy, and I have a few pre-existing debts. That's why I needed to do this job. This is another somewhat enlightening angle that I might not have considered otherwise. On the whole, I think the UK system of student loans is one of the better options where it isn't free like in most parts of Europe, but people having this be something that people turn to as a result of the student loan system is a pretty damning indictment. Then again, I'm sure some people do it because it's fewer hours and more pay than some hospitality or other student jobs. So maybe there's an element of preference here too. This sounds awful, but I was so desperate for money that I posted on Craigslist. Obviously, that was stupid and dangerous, but I was 17 and I didn't think about that. I basically asked people to bid to see who I'd go with. Keep in mind, this was a suburb in the Midwestern US, so the money wasn't crazy. I ended up driving 45 minutes to meet a guy who then drove me to his house. Again, so stupid. I can't believe I didn't die that night. This guy was like 50, a heavy cigarette smoker, smelled like booze. I told him I was 19. Again, stupid. He paid me $60 an hour for 3 hours. He smoked a few bowls, talked about jazz, and then very creepily went on and on about my chest. I was impressed he could get things going down there with how much substances he was taking, and with how much of a frequent user he seemed to be in general. Maybe he was on something else. That's mostly what I was thinking about the whole time. I didn't feel it when he was done because I was too concerned trying to give a good performance. So awkward, but he didn't seem to notice. When I got off him, it seemed like he had shed his protection, and I freaked out until I realized it was still inside me. We hung out for a little while, he slept and I tried not to puke, and then he took me back to my car, filled up my tank and gave me $300. All in all, not a horrible first experience, but also not wonderful. He's called me a few times, but I never went back. Just after high school, my girlfriend got a job at a service. It was back when pages were cool, for reference. I dropped her off at work on her first night. The place was in a strip mall, just a little spot that looked like a half-empty travel agency or an insurance shop. It was out calls only, so you basically wouldn't know it was that sort of place. I hung out in town because she said she'd page me if she needed me to come get her. She paged me pretty quick. I picked her up and we drove to McDonald's and got coffee. She was a wreck. She said that she'd told them she was going on a break, but that she wanted me to take her home. She wasn't even going back to get paid. She went on an out call to a guy's house. They had bouncer-like guys to drive the girls places, and so a guy drove her to some guy's house and waited outside in the car. The customer obviously wanted to do the deed, and she was totally blindsided by that. I honestly don't think she knew she was that sort of worker. She thought she was going to be a go out on the town for a date kind of deal. She even wore one of her nicest dresses. Long story short, she ended up just watching the guy tickle his pickle before fleeing the place and getting driven back to the office. Then I picked her up and she never went back. The thing I remember most clearly was when she was describing it to me. She was disillusioned, incredulous. There were pictures of his wife on the walls, pictures of his family. She was a great girl. Years on, from what I know via Facebook, she went to university, traveled the world, has a beautiful family and a successful career. A happy ending, if you will. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I tried being a rent boy for about a week. The first time was when someone messaged me on Manhunt offering to go south of the border on me for $200, which sounded okay and is actually not too uncommon in the gay community. I went to some random hotel in Chelsea and New York City, and yeah, we did as we arranged. It wasn't too bad until the last person I ended up seeing, which creeped me out enough to end that career. I wasn't too grossed out much by anyone, but I had a hard time keeping myself going with that guy. So for this client, with the username Glowbed, I took a little blue pill right before getting there. After about half an hour of somewhat awkward conversation, he kept talking about his night in heaven, he took me up to his room. As soon as we got there, I started to get creeped out. He lived completely alone in a large apartment, but when we got to his bedroom door, the door had a large 4x4-inch expensive keypad lock with a number password. Why would someone need that on a bedroom where they bring rent boys in when they live completely alone? The next thing he did was shut the lights off and say, "Wanna know why they call me Glowbed?" and flipped a switch which turned on bright blue lights underneath his bed. I decided to just jet out of the apartment and take a subway home. No longer an escort, I only saw a few clients and decided I'd rather make money the normal way. But here's my first experience. Signed up to an escort and camgirl site. My partner couldn't accompany me to the meet, so I got my gay best friend to drive me. It was in a travel lodge. Classy, right? And I was super nervous. I'd asked him if there was anything in particular he wanted me to wear, and he said he wanted me in casual clothes and no makeup. Of course, guys don't really have a clue what girls look like without a stitch of makeup on, so I put on foundation, blush, and mascara, and a cute sundress. The guy was around 50, I was 20 at the time, and he mainly wanted to make out and cuddle. For some reason, he had covered himself in talcum powder, which was odd, and he wasn't attractive, which made it hard for me to get going properly, but he seemed happy. The thing that weirded me out a little was he kept talking about our age differences and asked for my real name several times. I had a fake name for obvious reasons. I was reluctant to give him my real name and instead just gave him another fake name. I told him my real name was Elizabeth, but my friends called me Lizzie, and he called me Lizzie for the remainder of that appointment. Then he had the cheek to try and haggle me down for an extra hour, which I declined. Afterwards, when I was 300 quid richer for an hour of work, I felt strangely empowered. That last bit is indeed something the narrator has heard before. I guess if this kind of thing is done correctly and safely, it can be a fulfilling job for some, at least for a small part of their lives. Or maybe there are people who do it for decades and never lose that sense of power. I couldn't say. My first time was like that feeling you get as a kid when you know you weren't supposed to be doing something, but you did it anyway. It was a scary thrill, which is actually why I believe most people do it. I was 22 and had just graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in a major that would make me no money. I'd moved in with my parents and was just on a downward spiral. I posted on Craigslist, $400 an hour. I had no clue about rates and still don't, but from this thread it seems high. I met a man the next night at his house for an agreed upon 30 minutes. We sat on the couch and talked a little bit. He ran a small business, divorced, overweight, 40s. Really ordinary and quite nice, actually. He took me into the bedroom and there were lit candles and a bottle of lubricant on the nightstand. I wouldn't kiss him for a while, but he seemed lonely, I guess. I eventually did, which was probably stupid. He put a Johnny on and I went south on him for a while, but he didn't keep things going consistently. I climbed on and rode him and he didn't get done by the time the 30 minutes were up. I liked him, so I kept going until he was done. Maybe another 20 minutes? I didn't charge him for the extra. I didn't enjoy it as much as I would with a regular partner, but it wasn't bad. After we finished, he thanked me and we hugged. He suggested the next time he make a spaghetti dinner and we could eat and get to know each other. It wasn't as bad as I'd expected, and I wasn't mentally scarred, but I never did it again. I'm not sure why. He texted me several times after, and eventually I told him I'd moved. Sorry for the stilted way of writing this, I've never told this to anyone before, and it was kind of strange typing it all out. When I wasn't quite 20, I was tight on cash and decided, screw it, I needed a sugar daddy. I went on Craigslist and I found a guy. He wanted to meet me first and needed a new girl to replace his old one. He was willing to pay 4 figures per date. I drove to meet him and was stuck in traffic on the way for an hour or two. I sat at a Starbucks for a while waiting. He got lost because he was only there on a business trip. I was shaking by the time he came. We got burgers and drinks and sat at a table waiting for everything, talking. He was sweet, but not my type. I was so nervous and shaking. We got to this hotel and sat and talked and ate, then started getting frisky. He wouldn't stop talking about how amazing I looked and was, and I know he was trying to flatter me, but after a while it got really old. I stayed the night and left in the morning. He gave me money for gas. I later told him I was sorry, but the age difference felt too weird and he'd have to find another girl. But really, I just couldn't stand him. Then I found this married guy. We talked, I sent him pictures of myself, and he was hooked. He ordered things off Amazon for me to bring, and yeah, we're talking about bedroom equipment stuff. Doing it in the rear was on the list of necessities to him. I was a virgin that way and really hesitant about it. I told him I wanted to be blindfolded for the thrill of it, but really, I just didn't want to see his face. Drove an hour to a motel in his town to see him. The way everyone looked at me, I knew they knew what I was there for. I knocked on the door, it opened. I stepped inside where the lights were off and kept my eyes on the ground. He came up to me and started stroking my arms, my face. He instructed me to put the blindfold on, and I did. I hated it. I hated every minute of it. Doing it that way sucked, and doing it with him sucked even more. He kissed me with his bushy beard tickling my face, and I frickin' hated it. I wanted to vomit. He gave me the $400 and I left. I regretted everything. Turns out he was nuts about me. He wanted to take me on trips and buy me an apartment in his town and all that stuff. I agreed to meet him again, but not doing it in the butt and no kissing. I told him it felt weird to kiss him when he had a wife. I know that's a weird frickin' thing for a working girl to say, but what was I supposed to say? You disgust me? The second time he was on white snow and had a hard time keeping things working down there. I had to awkwardly console him while he beat himself up over it and tried to restart him several times. We laid together for a while, and while we tried a few times, without a full rager, it's pretty much a fail. Once he gave up on the whole thing and admitted defeat, I packed everything up and sat on the edge of the bed. He bought my money and placed it in my hand and told me to look at him. I was still wearing the blindfold and I shook my head. He took it off me and told me to look at him. He was wearing a bandana that covered most of his face except his eyes. He had lovely eyes, and it made me want to cry when I thought of his wife. The guy was convinced that I wasn't in it for the money. I had a sick mind, a dirty side, and only he could fulfill it. I didn't bother correcting him because I didn't want to kill the self-esteem he was building back for himself. I told him I couldn't do it anymore. He messaged me a few times over the next year, but I kept telling him no matter what price he gave me. I regret both encounters to this day, and nobody knows about it. Gay man here. I remember the first time I accepted money for doing the deed with this guy. He messaged me on a gay dating site. This guy, 60-something years old, offered me $100 to give me a down-under kiss. I knew I was down immediately. I countered back that I'd do it for $150, and he had to let me watch adult films while he did it. He asked, "Can I swallow it?" Yeah, dude. So I went to his place. As a 28-year-old adult now, I think, what the frick, that guy could have been anyone. He could have taken me prisoner and now be wearing my skin like a dress. But he didn't do any of those things. He put on some adult films for me, which was very helpful as I wasn't attracted to him at all. I whipped it out, started tickling it, and once I was ready, he went to town until I was done. $150, thank you very much. He asked if I'd be willing to come again sometime. Yeah, duh. So I'd head over to his place about once a month. Got paid, repeat. When I moved away for college, I found some similar guys. Old men, fat men, especially ugly men. I never had to make them finish, they just wanted to do it for me. So that's what I sold them. A chance to make a hot young guy with a big eggplant arrive. Forgive the vulgarity. It was all about letting these guys dream that they'd gotten me without paying for me. I learned quickly that they were happier if I could make them feel like it wasn't an exchange. My favorite and fondest memory was one guy who didn't even want that. He wanted someone to cuddle with, rub against. We stayed in our undies. I actually felt sort of good about visiting him, because it didn't feel as gross. He just wanted human contact. And I gave it to him. For a price, but I gave it to him. Male escort here. First client was a 19-year-old, thin, yet very busty blonde white girl with braces. She wanted to experiment and get some practice on someone, so she gave me $100 and did everything imaginable to me. Kind of a win. And yeah, no, 8 times out of 10 as a male escort, you get men for clients. I've never known a purely straight male worker that, even if they accepted every job they were offered, made enough money to live on. A few times here and there for extra spending money, sure, but they never made enough money to pay the bills consistently. What are some of the worst things to happen to Chuck E. Cheese workers? Had a complaint that a kid was dipping toilet paper into the women's stalls and then eating it. And yep, he was. Same kid attacked me mercilessly while I was wearing the Rat in the Hat suit, all the time screaming, "Man in suit!" The best one was a complaint about the same kid eating from other families' tables. He was, and he looked them dead in the eyes while doing it. These were all on different occasions, by the way. Hey sir, someone left a whole bunch of brownies in the sky crawl. They weren't brownies. Cleaning throw-up out of the sky tubes. The smell was horrifying. Thank you, unnamed Chuck E. Cheese employee who saved naive, desperate for employment me by answering my question about employment with, "You don't want to work here. You're a hero." Anytime a kid threw up in the ball pit was an especially horrible day. There were several instances during the 6 years I'd worked there, but these times were quite memorable. There were 2 ways you could do this. A large, both sides opened cardboard box to cordon off the affected area, and saying it was a slow day and other kids weren't splashing all the balls around, we'd then put all of the cordon balls into a large netting bag so that we could gather them, take them outside, and they'd be sprayed off. Or there was the second way of cleaning. If the mess was all over the ball pit, then all of the balls had to be gathered, sprayed off, and the inside liner that held the balls had to be wiped down and cleaned. The only good thing about having to take all of them out was that you could find some pretty good stuff that happened to be in people's pockets and fell out, including money, pocket knives, and even rings. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese as my first job. On more than one occasion, kids went up into the sky netting, which was basically a bird nest made out of rope suspended in the air, and then they'd just empty their bowels on the poor souls below. After this happened a few times, we decided to move the carousel ride, which had a roof, under the bird nest, so at least it would just land on the roof and not someone's head and or dinner. Yep, a kid I was training was leading me to a skee-ball machine that he just couldn't fix. He was probably 5 feet in front of me and walked under the net. All of a sudden, white stuff just fell and covered his head. Some little kid had stuck his face through the netting and just emptied down on him. I was set to go home right then and his shift had just started. My boss was going to make him stay since I was going home. I told him to go home and shower and I'd stay on till he got back. Surprisingly, he actually came back. Yeah, although I couldn't say I'd be surprised at him choosing to opt out, what I will say is that your compassion probably went a long way towards retaining him. We've probably all worked jobs that sucked but were made bearable by our co-workers, and it sounds like you were doing your part in making his time there marginally less awful, which is something. Former employee, I worked 6 months in high school. First one, a family racked up a $300 bill and tried to pay for it with food stamps, and the time 2 families got into a fight during their kid's birthday party and had to be escorted out by the police. I later found one of their weaves on the table. The third time I got kicked in the crotch while in the Chuck E. Cheese suit. I'm a girl and it still hurt. Another little girl asked me when the real Chuck was going to come out because I was too short to be the real Chucky. And finally, a mum wanted to show her kid that under the costume I was just a real person and asked if I'd take off Chucky's head to show her daughter. I did, and the kid got even more freaked out thinking that the mouse had engulfed me. I've repressed a lot of the memories, but this is the ones I can remember. I worked at Charles Entertainment Cheese for nearly 2 years during high school and then again later for 1 more year. The worst parts always had to do with the parents, of course. The one that sticks out in my head is the most super drunk, very unattractive older woman who had just not quit hitting on me and then got way too handsy. It was just after I started. I spent the first few months there working the game room floor. This lady came up to me saying one of the machines was not giving out tickets and I needed to check it out for her. I sat down on the stool to open up the panel and check things out. During this time, she began rubbing my back, saying how cute I was and how much of a help I was being. It was about this time I realized she reeked of booze and was drunk. Next thing I knew, one of her hands was somewhere it shouldn't be, and she had found the prize she was after. I quickly sprang up from my seat, saying I had to get some tools from the back. I went and told the games manager what happened. I'm not really sure what happened after that, as I stayed in the back for a while. The next time I came back out, she was gone, thankfully. As a whole, I look back at my time working there with some fond memories. Our place was almost entirely staffed with high school or young college kids. Had a ton of great times there and the pizza kicked butt. But yeah, cleaning crap out of the SkyTube sucks. Oh, and I just remembered the craziest thing that happened while I worked there. Next door to us was the DMV, and one day a lady parked in the fire lane in front of it to help her elderly passenger inside find a seat. Well, in the time it took her to do that, a tow truck swooped in to tow her. This happened fairly frequently in our parking lot, so my coworker Buddy and I got closer to the glass at the front of the store to watch the shenanigans. The tow truck backed up right to the car, lifted the front end, and started pulling away with it. As the tow truck passed our window, we realized there were kids in the back seat. My buddy and I ran out the front doors of the store and started chasing after the guy, screaming about the kids. We finally caught up to him in the back of the parking lot where he'd usually secure the car to the truck before taking it back to the lot, and told him what he did. He just said, "Oh crap," dropped the car and took off. At this point, the mum of the kids had run to where we were at, understandably screaming about her babies. The cops were called, and since we knew which company the truck belonged to, the tow truck driver eventually showed back up. Not sure how much trouble the driver actually got in, but the cops were telling us that the law states that tow truck drivers must verify there are no passengers in the car before doing a snatch and grab. Adrenaline was definitely pumping with me and my coworkers for a while after that one. I have a good friend who used to work at Chuck E. Cheese. Him and his fellow co-workers conspired over the span of a few months to steal the various pieces of the suit. They'd claim that this part got ripped or some kid messed up this part and we had to throw it out, until they had a full suit. For what reason, you ask? Literally just to take turns showing up to parties in the full suit to make a bunch of drunk people super stoked. I remember when I worked at that absolute crap hole. I had to take out the coins from the machines and refill the tickets and clean them. The worst thing that happened wasn't the number 2 or throw up in the tubes above that the kids crawled in, but the time a kid apparently had to go boom boom but didn't want to go to the bathroom because he'd lose all of his progress. So he just let it all out right where he was standing. I guess he was 3 tokens deep, so he committed to the game. Well, at one point he lost and ran out of tokens. Guess what he does next? If you guessed walks away leaving a mound of crap on the floor like it wasn't his, you're wrong. He frickin' grabbed said matter and just smeared it all over the machine like he was frosting a cake. Full-on tantrums while trying to talk smack, then just wiped his hands on the carpet. By the way, if you're thinking that turds are biohazard territory, you'd be a dummy to think that minimum wage workers aren't constantly required by managers to clean it up. This is correct. Sincerely, all other hospitality and gas station workers on the planet Earth. Says a lot about how we treat the bottom rung of society when we have to do the same job as a guy in hazmat gear. I worked there for only 4 months in high school before I quit. Everyone was required to wear the mouse costume. Kids would literally beat you up to get your attention. It sucked, because I went to a Catholic high school where we wore uniform skirts. Every Monday morning I'd go to the school covered in bruises. That must have raised a lot of questions about your home life, and one too many trips to the counselor's office. The worst part was wearing that rat suit after this one guy was in it. He took it seriously and would get up on the prize tables and get the kids to chant, "Chucky, Chucky." I could frickin' hear it back in the kitchen over the noise and music. The guy was completely undressed in the suit, and he sweat a lot. I probably have hepatitis. Best part, though, was taking the leftover pizza dough into the back lot after closing and having a 1v1 deathmatch throwing softball-sized dough balls at each other's heads. Luckily, this one didn't happen to me, but somebody got shanked. We actually hired a bouncer on our busiest days because we attracted the trashiest people. There was also a ton of banging in the Chuck E. Cheese closet. This happened in the state of California, where servers still make minimum wage, not some $2.13 bullcrap. I was originally offered around $8.50, but that was retracted and I was paid $8 because I'd received tips, supposedly, which is what motivated me to beat the system. I worked at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school in a wealthy area, so I got the bright idea to neatly fold and rip the part of the bill that stated tips are included in the cost. Because they weren't. I got my co-workers in on it, and eventually we started presenting the bills to each other's parties and saying, if you'd like to tip your host, they can only accept cash, to plant the idea in the parents' head. One day, we got caught. I got blamed. I wasn't allowed to host parties anymore. Instead, the general manager hired his family and friends and allowed them to take advantage of my system. It was a goldmine, because sometimes I'd take home $200 in cash as a 16-year-old. I didn't even make that in 2 weekends of hourly pay. Not my story, but my dad's. This was decades ago. He worked as the man in the suit and all of his friends knew it. He had this one friend, we can call him Gene, who liked to take things over the top. He was working, and suddenly my dad hears a roar. He turns to see his buddy Gene sprinting at him full speed, no stop in sight. Boom! My dad is on the ground, head off, and the only thing heard was the screams of young children. My dad got fired that day. He told me that his boss thought it was a planned prank on the company. As much as my dad denied it, he couldn't keep himself from laughing. My dad was a known prankster anyways, so he just accepted it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Former manager checking in from like 10 to 15 years ago. I have a few worsts, I'll divide them up below. The actual worst? The time a custody dispute carried into a birthday party for a 3-year-old. Multiple people had gats and knives, someone actually fired at the mother, and someone else tried to cut the father. This caused a full-on riot resulting in a lockdown. Luckily, we were very close to a police station and no one was seriously injured. The hilarious worst was 2 employees doing the deed in the Chuck E. closet, where employees could go change without being in the way of the kitchen or in sight of the children. The clincher was that one was wearing the Chuck E. Cheese head. This was bad because once the closet was unlocked and open, you were in sight, and we had lots of horrified parents and terrified children, and it was really hard not to laugh. The creepy worst was one of the animatronics failing and becoming possessed. We were about 2 weeks away from becoming a Stage 2 store, which was the next level of upgrades and improvements, including removing the animatronics. So they just told us to let it go and try to keep it in check. It sounded demonic and would just turn on at random. Like in the middle of the happy birthday song, its head caught a point that it couldn't turn anymore and got stuck moving a few inches back and forth and then caught on fire while trying to demonically still sing. And the sad worst. We all had to get background checks if we had not been employed for 30 days because of a manager in our district, but not from our store, who turned out to not be taking care of his dying mother for a month. He was actually in jail for a DUI. The area manager was concerned about what else they didn't know because he'd been with the company for like 25 years and worked up from a cashier. They ran a background check and he had multiple issues with the law. His family vacations were all timed with when he was in jail, and he was a registered unspeakable act offender. Not the worst, actually pretty good depending on your perspective. My dad used to manage one back in the mid-80s and would always go through the cash registers at the end of every night and trade in his own pocket change for all of the rare, vintage coinage that teenagers would steal from their parents' stashes. He amassed a great collection of silver coins and other discontinued currency. Mercury dimes, buffalo nickels, stuff like that. He still has all of it to this day. I was the technician at a Chuck E. Cheese in high school. One day I was covering someone and I had to wear the suit and do the show. On my way back to the room, a little kid ran up to see Chucky and stabbed me in the ankle with a pencil as hard as he could. I rushed into the back room and took off the pants portion of the suit, pulled down my sock and a bunch of blood poured out. Didn't even go home early, the boss just had me stand at the door. Charles Entertainment Cheese. You can lie down and dress your injuries when you're dead. Seriously, as crap as most minimum wage hospo jobs are, this particular chain does sound like it might be the worst one to work for. Like, I worked at McDonald's and this blows it out of the water. Am I wrong? Any positive experiences working with the rat in the comments? Former employee of 9 months. There was once a very old woman peeing on the carpet in the entrance while standing up. Also, cleaning pee out of the sky tubes after a complaint that it got in a kid's eyes and he couldn't see. Then there was walking into the bathroom to find an abandoned pair of undies with number 2 still in it. Took everything I had not to throw up while throwing it away. Also, while in the Chucky suit, being asked by a large black woman wearing all blue, "Why you got all that red on you?" And finally, asking a mute girl if she wanted to put candles on her cake and being told she can't talk by her parents. There were definitely many more less than enjoyable experiences, but these are the ones that stand out to me. So, to sum all these stories up, ball pits are nasty and you should watch out for crap and throw up in the high tubes. Not an employee, but one time as a very young kid, my older brother almost got lured out of the building by a stranger with the promise of a bunch of free tickets. I intervened and everything was fine, the employees were notified. Another time, this same kid almost got into a truck to help find a missing puppy. He was a very kidnappable kid, I guess, but I can't seem to get rid of his dumb idiot butt. Once I walked in on this 40-year-old man just giving his pickle a little tickle. Our eyes met and we kinda just stared at one another. Most awkward 10 seconds of my life. That damn suit. I was a game room technician. That part was awesome. I got to play games all day, fix coin jams. However, one day, before I was allowed to leave, they decided I had to wear the suit. This was 10 years ago, so it was before the redesign of Chuck E. Cheese. I'm 6 foot, and with the suits on, ears included, I was a giant. You can't really see in the damned thing. Anyways, they led me out into the main hall, and I was basically lumbering around. It's this horrible experience because I couldn't see. I kept bumping into things. You'd think this would be the worst part, but nope. It was the kids I scared. They counted. I made 7 children break down, scream, and bawl their eyes out. I felt like crap for it. Wasn't much that I could do, though. It got better. I finally got to take the suit off and left. I was walking to my car and this family was leaving. Their little boy was crying. I figured it was due to having to leave. Nope, he was just wailing because Chuck E. Cheese terrified him. The mum goes, "I've had it. You need to straighten up already. If you don't, I'll take you back in and feed you to that giant mouse." Worst experience. Another time we had these sketchy guys come in and try to rob us right before close. Our manager, let's call him O, decided he wasn't going to call the cops and he'd handle it himself. So he runs back to the kitchen, grabs a pizza cutter, which is basically a giant curved machete. He was trying to be all sneaky and kind of hide it by keeping it close to his leg. We all thought we were about to get shot because he wanted to play hero. The guys ended up fleeing, after seeing him with a giant blade, but it was a pretty terrifying experience for a young high school kid. Having to wear that costume, it's probably one of the most degrading things I've ever had to do. Having to clean the bathrooms, watching children open up the containers with cheese and lick them, and wondering how many times I've used condiments after children have licked them, catching strep throat several times, having a group of bored parents test the system of making sure the correct kid leaves with the correct parent. We don't usually check this because it would be obvious if you're taking the kid because the kid would be crying. That would usually be when I'd check if the kid didn't look like the parent. Or having some lady accuse us of spraying Windex in the salad. Our manager told us we couldn't take sick days unless we had a doctor's note, which is against the law. Managers would scream and degrade us teenagers in front of whoever. Having to close at the end of the night because we'd basically be cleaning up after children. But yeah, having to deal with crappy parents. Having parents complain about our attitude because we don't want to be around their crappy kids. Having kids constantly running while you're trying to deliver a pizza. Wheelies. Having to clean the sky tubes after a kid unloaded in them. Having to work with teenagers who are not the nicest groups of people. Mothers dropping their children's diapers on the floor instead of the trash can. I've blocked the rest out. One time at Charles Entertainment Cheese when I was working there, some food fight broke out and one kid chucked his entire cake straight at Chucky, and then he cried out about how he didn't get a cake. The kid's mum went to the bathroom and she was in there for a good 15 minutes. I went in there to ask what was up and I saw her having a mental breakdown. Turns out she spent hours making that cake specially for him, and it was all ruined in about 30 seconds. You know what? After hearing all these, I'm going to be telling my son that he's lucky as crap that he got hired on at Domino's before Chuck E. Cheese got back to him. One time I saw 2 families going at it, throwing punches, cursing, and spitting because one of the kids took some tickets from one of the arcade games that didn't belong to him. Cops had to be called and both dads got arrested. Okay, this is wild. This is easily the 3rd story I've heard about an all-out brawl happening at this chain. One of them I think I'd heard before I'd made this video. These places are more of a hotbed for human trash than cruise ships. That's right, you heard me. I've been at Chuck E. Cheese for 4 years. I'm a cashier and I remember I had a closing shift one night. Cashiers close down the cash area, salad bar, beverage bar, and restrooms, at least at my location. I usually leave the restrooms last, so on that night I'd finished up everything else and went to clean the restrooms. My locations are typically very clean, so I never had an issue with these, until that day. When I walked into the ladies' room, I saw what no employee wants to see in the restrooms. It was in the biggest stall, just imagine turds, but everywhere. On the walls, on the seat, on the floor, it was like semi-solid, almost liquid-like. On the floor near the drain was more. Imagine the emoji, but in real life. That's what was there. I remember a coworker came in and Snapchatted it for some reason. I have no idea how a human could have accomplished that. I called in my manager for backup. He came in and screamed. I screamed. Then we cleaned it up begrudgingly. I wore like 5 pairs of gloves at the same time. It took us far longer than usual. I wasn't happy to say the least. Luckily, it's never happened since. Nothing has ever been worse than that. In short, the big stall of the women's restroom, explosion of liquid-like crap everywhere. The real-life equivalent of the poopy emoji also makes an appearance. My manager and I scream in horror. This happened 15 years or so ago. I was designated to be the big cheese himself, a glorious honor. Huh! And the fact that I was one of the only guys that worked there meant that I was always the one chosen for that hot suit. This day, a football team was having a party there, 10 or 12-year-olds or something. My manager knew what was going to happen to me, though. My young, naive brain only had innocent thoughts about making the children happy. Then the coach playfully tosses me a football. At least it was in my limited field of vision, so I actually caught it. And it happened. A horde of 10-year-olds descended upon me in the cramped area between two long tables. Valiantly as I tried to keep my balance, these little demons proceeded to tackle me onto the ground. I thankfully didn't break anything and I kept my head from falling off while being knocked around, but I was angry. As soon as they got off me, I got up and left to go into the back and take off the child's entertainment cheese outfit. Another time, the same manager as the last story made me work off the clock, but I was too young and dumb to document and report it. What did you do to get expelled from your college? I went to a private Christian university, and I have a friend who got expelled for supposedly exorcising a demon out of someone in the middle of a wide-open courtyard. I unintentionally got another student expelled. We were critiquing websites we had built when I noticed that one looked exactly like mine with a few tweaks. I popped open the source and noticed it was a line-for-line copy of my code with a few changes to the CSS. I brought it up to the professor to protect myself in case he noticed them, though I doubt I would have been suspected because mine was more cohesive. The changes he did make didn't make the site more appealing. Anyway, apparently it was his third time plagiarizing. After 2 times, you go on trial with the school. If you don't get expelled then, a third time is the nail in the coffin. I just spent too much time drinking and not going to class. I was a junior with a 1.6 overall GPA. The university said they didn't need my ilk around there and would open my spot for someone who would appreciate it. That got my attention. I went to the dean and talked with him for a couple of hours trying to get back in. He said, no, 19 out of 20 of you guys go back to doing the same thing. I told him I'd be the exception. He gave me another chance. From then on out, I was 4.0 every semester. I finally got my GPA up over 2.5 so I could graduate. I made sure I went back to the dean's office to thank him and tell him that I was the 1 out of the 20 that made it. Installing Bitcoin miners on all the computers in a video editing lab. Our professor explicitly warned us not to run Bitcoin miners on our university's high-performance cluster, as that would get you expelled. I highly suspect someone did exactly that the semester before us. For being off campus with a member of the opposite gender without proper supervision. No, seriously. A guy and a girl in my uni, which is located in a conservative country, were caught making out in the stairway. Both of them were legally adults. The girl's parents were called, they took her away, so technically not expelled, and got her married to another guy that she was already arranged for by them. The guy was transferred to a lesser-known college where he didn't perform well but landed a crappy job. Greetings, my fellow Indians. Man, that sucks no matter what culture it happens in. Honestly, people get enough moral policing when they're young in school. Adults don't need it when they move on to higher education. There might be personal reasons why hooking up maybe isn't the best idea, but these last examples feel like they shouldn't have been a thing. I was making a search engine for our school teacher evaluation page. It absolutely blew up in popularity and a large portion of the school was using it, about 5,000 views per day. Essentially, it was like Rate My Professors, except it used the evaluations that they forced students to do at the end of class, as data. I also added features that made it more desirable to students. It became so popular that it was showing up on the front page of Google for certain teacher names. Some of those teachers had low ratings and got really mad and complained. I'd unintentionally violated IP laws because the evaluations were under password protections and my site was not. The only reason I didn't get expelled was because the dean of my department had my back. He did research and concluded the information shouldn't have been private in the first place, then sent a public information request to make it so my project didn't break the law. I definitely had people asking for my expulsion for a scary amount of time, though. I got thrown out after I graduated from a master's degree program. The teacher asked me out for drinks when I asked to talk about one of my papers. I turned him down. I had to take a class with him in my next-to-last semester, and he tried to throw me out for plagiarism. I tried to press harassment charges, and the ombudsman talked me out of it by saying I'd be stuck in his class if I pressed charges. The ombudsman asked to contact administrators at the school and urged me to get an incomplete in the guy's class and to just graduate next term. After graduation, I was getting ready to go on to job interviews and I received a letter telling me I have to enroll in 4 courses and get 4 A's to offset the F's this teacher in question wanted to give me. I followed up, and the teacher, who is now the chair of the program, elects himself my academic advisor and takes over the situation. He fakes my grades and tells me I have 6 weeks to complete the entire course all over again. He tells me if I do my best, he'll make it possible to graduate, as it's mathematically impossible. I can't complete the work in time, and he throws me out. I'm given permission to reapply, and soon it becomes apparent they're not going to let me in to fix the situation. I contact the graduate department and meet with their legal counsel. I show them the faked grades, explain the rule violations, and inform them of my having reported the guy. They tell me to try and work with the program again, and they'll intervene. The program refuses any solution involving my readmission. The graduate dean allows me to file academic grievances and rules that there are a lot of things wrong, but then does nothing about them. He concludes by telling me I can either get readmitted or give a replacement course via transfer. I take the course and submit it. The graduate dean says they can't accept the course if I can't get enrolled. The dean rules the matter reviewed and closed. I sue the school alleging unjust enrichment. I provide all of the documents and records, as it's all conducted via email and I have my student folder. These get certified via discovery. The school evokes sovereign immunity and says that since the fraud and negligence happened more than 2 years before I filed, they're immune to prosecutions. The judge agrees, and I file an appeal. As of August of the year I wrote this, 2017, it will be 10 years. My roommate got expelled for basically never going to class, not even when there was an important exam. He spent all night smoking green herb with me and playing video games, not with me, and then slept all day until about 5 p.m. Like I'd wake up, go to my 8:30 lecture, get lunch, go to lab 2 to 5, then come back to my room, and my roommate would still be sleeping. I found out the following summer that he'd gotten a letter from the university asking him not to come back. Last I heard from him, he'd enrolled at a commuter school where he made the dean's list. Expelled because my GPA dropped below the competitive level for the engineering school at my college. I was given the option of transferring to a different school. They recommended I go into the humanities or be expelled. Humanities, the ultimate engineering burn. I left with a 2.9 GPA. I needed to maintain a 3.25 in order to stay in the program I was in, as it was also providing a scholarship. I couldn't afford school without it. I went into HVAC in the trades with an emphasis on programming. Thankfully, I had a job from the previous summer that was willing to hire me on full-time before this happened. So I took the expulsion and went to work full-time. Since then, I've gotten my certifications and I work in the trades doing fairly well for myself, so yay? If people are genuinely curious, I highly recommend looking into the trades. Some people just aren't meant for university. I'm not saying they're not smart. For instance, I graduated high school valedictorian with a 4.45 GPA. Some brains just aren't set up to be learning in a desk for more than 4 years. There's a stigma that it's a lower-class job, but don't let that stop you. I paid off a lot of the student debt I had within a year and a half of working, and at 23 I'm looking to purchase my first house. The trades, assuming you get technical training or go into a highly sought-after trade, pay extremely well. I make a little over 48k a year after being in the trades for a little over 3 years, and that's still as an apprentice. And believe me, I'm not bashing the humanities one bit. My brother went that route, and he's one of the most intelligent people I know. I just have a mechanically inclined mind, and it would have been wasted going that direction. I had a friend who skipped all classes and failed everything because all he wanted to do was play League of Legends. He got a warning that if he didn't get his grades up, he'd be suspended for a year. He got suspended. When he went back to school a year later, the same thing happened again. Now he can't go back to that college again. I mean, the narrator played so much StarCraft during his bachelor's degree first year, messed up his sleeping schedule, and still never managed to get even one of these warnings. And he's not even a very bright guy. So how much do you have to play to get summoned by the dean like this? Like, you're aware that you're taking out a loan to do this, right? Surely you can occasionally pull an all-nighter to panic write an essay like I did. Wasn't expelled, but damn near. Junior year, I took an elective class called Reading Fiction. Cool class, but the teacher was extremely strict and took the class very seriously. I'm okay at writing papers, and this class involved heavy essays about writing techniques, symbolism, foreshadowing, that kind of thing. We were assigned to read a book that I can't remember the name of, but I wasn't into it at all. I struggled to finish it and struggled even more to write a detailed paper on it. I slammed out the minimal page requirement and sources needed. It wasn't my best work, but it was serviceable. I get an email from the teacher a few days later saying he'd like me to come to his office. He accused me of plagiarizing certain segments of my paper, which I didn't, and was ready to send my case to the dean. Apparently some things I sourced in my paper were done incorrectly, which led him to believe I straight up copy and pasted from the internet. Second hour of office time was him passively aggressively calling me an idiot. Currently, I'm aware of a group of international students getting expelled from my school. They've been whispering to each other during exams in another language, and as luck would have it, my professor happens to speak that language and has slowly been building a case against them without their knowing. These kids somehow also got the solutions to every homework and exam last semester, which is very similar to what we've been assigned this semester. However, the kids are so frickin' lazy they blindly copy whole solutions, not realizing the numbers are different. Sometimes units are metric and they answer in English, and one problem asked for something completely different than they solved for using the exact procedure to solve last semester's homework. They're absolutely screwed, and I'm kind of excited to see it. One of them had a 3.7 GPA and was on the verge of being auto-admitted to a higher program. He's probably been cheating his whole college career. We're 2 semesters away from graduation. Plot twist, the advisor to that program is the instructor that's currently building the case against them. So basically, that one specific guy is mega screwed. Our professor is savage. He's been grading all of their homework and exams like everything was fine, and one day unleashed a dossier of justice to COAM. Late update for anyone interested in an update, COAM didn't actually expel anyone after all. They've just completely lost the homework portion of their grade, 20%, so they're probably all getting C's at best. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm bipolar. I rocked college and got straight A's while I was manic as crap sleeping 3 hours a night for several years, drinking, substances, partying, all the usuals. Then I curled up in a dark hole and cried for several months and couldn't even hardly wake up enough to go to any of my classes. Got academic probation and told my advisors that I had no idea what was happening to me. This wasn't the real me. I managed to pull off another year of straight A's and little to no sleep. Then I crashed again and did nothing but sleep for months at a time, wanting nothing more from life than for it to end. As soon as possible, please. By my own hand if necessary. This time I got kicked out completely. Fast forward a few more years of the mania and depression cycles, and it eventually got so bad that I stole a car while manic and drove 800 miles across the US on some paranoid delusional insanity. I thought I was phasing between alternate realities and the government was going to try and capture me and study me to see how I was doing it. Don't ask. Luckily, I ended up in the hospital instead of jail, and I got diagnosed, finally. Now I take a frick ton of medicine and I'm not quite so crazy anymore. The end. I had a particularly rough semester and got a D in a class that I'd previously dropped after about a week the prior semester because my schedule was too busy then. Department rules say that you can't attempt a class for credit more than twice, including drops, so I got kicked out of my major. I was 14 hours away from graduation at the time. The academic advisor said I could either change my major, so basically start college all over again, or F off for a year and then come back on probation. So I guess I'm not expelled per se, but I'm taking an involuntary gap year. I went to college right after high school and didn't really have direction as to what I wanted to pursue for a career. I signed up for classes and went because I was told, "You're supposed to go to college and get a degree." I started to not care about school about 3 or 4 semesters in and stopped putting forth effort. I decided I'd rather work my job, drink with my friends, and play my favorite video games. My grades tanked, then I stopped going to finals and failed many courses. My university finally gave me a warning and then dismissed me. I spent a semester off before applying to the local community college down the road to pursue a career as an EMT. I found a passion for medicine and a desire to achieve something more than substances, video games, and a dead-end job. I repaired my GPA by getting an associate's degree in arts, a general AA, and then went back to the university that dismissed me. I eventually would graduate with a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and go on to medical school afterwards, where I'd finish that chapter and start my residency training in family medicine. I'm almost done with my intern year. When I was in college, I got suspended 3 times for bad grades. At one point, my GPA was 1.0. I finally got it together and graduated with a degree in finance, and a few years later went back and got a second bachelor's in accounting. I think my GPA is 3.2 now. I'm not working in finance or accounting because I can't find a job. I mostly just hate my life now and wish I hadn't wasted all that time. I shot a firework out of my butt in a campus-owned house. You know what? I'm reluctant to believe that and that alone was the cause of someone being thrown out of a university. Did he get warnings for a bunch of other crap like this first? I mean, it's dangerous and all, but I really hope we don't live in a world where a stalker can get one slap on the wrist for making someone's life a living hell at university, and you're out on the street with hundreds of thousands in loan debt for one scorched butthole. Failing grades, insane roommates, and theft accusations, I bombed out due to massive stress, appealed, and got back in. Okay, for a more serious and detailed response, I was going to the Art Institute of Philadelphia, one of the few places I legitimately consider hell on earth. The school paired me up with various roommates who had severe issues, like refusing to shower for 6 months straight, hardcore substance addicts, a guy who would just openly toss off to the most absurd and dark pictures you can imagine while I was still in the room with him. It was all nightmare fuel. The entire dorm was terrible. People were constantly kicking or punching body-sized holes into and through walls. Elevators would drop multiple floors when you were in them. It was a nightmare. And then one winter, a fire alarm started going off every single fricking night around 2 a.m., and we'd have to evac the building in the dead of winter. Nothing quite wakes you up like fire alarms and freezing cold. I mentally started to lose it. My grades dropped and I failed the semester because I could never sleep. Between the fire alarms and overwhelming funk, I was getting extremely worn down and stressed. This continued on. One of the deans calls on me one day and accuses me of credit card theft. According to the school, I'd stolen a credit card from one of my roommates and racked up a massive bill at Lane Bryant, and they had proof. Lane Bryant, which I didn't know at the time, was a women's clothing store that specialized in plus-size apparel. It was implied I was buying these for my girlfriend, but I had to point out to the school that I was gay. They changed their story to the fact that I must have been buying them for myself, implying I was a cross-dresser. I kinda lost it there and asked them to provide any shred of proof to back up their claims. They had none, but proceeded to attack me about this crap for weeks, demanding I pay back the money I never took or they'd have to escalate things. Then I ended up with a roommate who was caught growing substances, the fungal kind, in my closet. He got caught, but the school decided that chaperoning the guy was not their responsibility, and he ended up stealing half my crap, to which the school was like, "Did you have insurance? No? Haha, not our problem, please get out of my office." After that, everything tanked. The stress piled on and the plurality of crappiness that exuded from the school got to me, and I failed out. As I said, I was able to get appeal, get back in, and later graduate. As a bonus, a few semesters after all of this crap happened, the school paired me up with 2 roommates whose previous roommate pulled a weapon on them and threatened to kill them. The school moved the 2 guys into my room, and the guy who'd threatened them broke into our building and got into my apartment. That school was an absolute nightmare. I got expelled in 2004 for inciting a riot. Apparently you can get kicked out for not showing up to class and failing everything. Who knew? I knew a guy who got expelled from an Ivy League for getting caught with too much white snow. He works at California Pizza Kitchen now. Freshman year of engineering, and I was all of 3 months in. I'd invited the RA over to play some Halo. As he walked through the hall, he noticed my dorm neighbor had his door open with beer cans everywhere. He shook his head and reluctantly told me he couldn't game and has to write this guy up. The night after, I wake up to a loud knock on my door. Thinking it's some prankster, I mumbled, "F off, I'm sleeping." And then I heard my RA's voice say, "It's no joke, open up." Adrenaline kicks in and I bolted out of bed. It's the RA with 2 security guards. I was told that they were notified I'd made dangerous-sounding comments and had to search my room. They found a disassembled airsoft weapon, the battery and spring, that I was kind of taking apart, a length of rope and a standard toolbox and an electronics kit. This is where it got horrible. The length of rope was wrapped neatly around a water pipe in my room. It was black and purple, and my girlfriend at the time was way too into some alternative stuff, and I was too lazy to put it away. I should note I was just storing it on the pipe, not hanging someone from it. The security officers claimed it looked like a noose, despite no knots. The electronics kit they said looked like bomb parts, to which I gave them the exact name of the professor who was helping me with my project. They also took several of my tools from my toolbox. I was immediately marched to the security office at 2 a.m. to wait for my parents to pick me up. Talk about the worst car ride ever back home. I had no idea what happened and I wanted to just throw myself out of the car. A day later, we went back to talk to the administration. It was recognized that I was thrown under the bus, but that was the extent of any sympathy given. I was faced with the choice of either a full semester suspension or to just leave and have any judicial records sealed. I chose the latter. That day, in front of half the dorm, my parents and I packed up the car and left. I was able to apply and get into a different school for the spring semester, though without the $35K scholarship I'd previously received. But I'm now an employed civil engineer and life's been going pretty well. Holy crud! These university administrations seem completely useless. What annoys me the most about this is that nobody even seemed to benefit from it. Why did the RA want you to get caught out and apparently fabricate something about you making dangerous comments? So much wasted and thrown away, and a committee completely unwilling to do anything to stop everything you had worked for being ruined. I'm glad that you ended up okay anyway. I was a friendless loser in high school and middle school, so I was very sensitive when I could tell someone else was bullied. There was a kid in my Spanish class who clearly had some spectrum-level stuff going on, and he'd ask really inappropriate questions, and everyone made fun of him, laughed at him, rolled their eyes, even the teacher. I felt bad for him. I asked him to work with me on a project, and I invited him to my dorm room. My roommate and his friends happened to be there and were smoking before heading out. He got all perturbed, and I ended up doing all of the work and letting him take credit because I felt bad. He decided to immediately go to campus security and report me for allowing illegal activities to go on. Me and my roommate and his friends all got arrested and taken away in cuffs and shackles in front of the entire student body. I then had to leave the school, and my family never recovered from the whole thing. My mother recently passed away, and this incident hurt our relationship for the remainder of her life. I was forced to take NA classes, and they asked me to leave since I'd never done any substances or drunk before college, and I was still in my first year. They just auto-passed me and expunged my record at least. I was in classes with people who had scars all over their bodies, arms ruined by substance injections, people who had problems with self-mutilation and other kinds of stuff, and I was just some 18-year-old goody-two-shoes nerd kid. I ended up having to spend a few months in a psych ward as well, since this incident made me deeply mentally unwell, since I lost my friends, my family, and my future. One mistake and it completely altered the course of my life. I was trying to help someone and they screwed me. Because of what this kid did, I never went out of my way to help anyone who was bullied, and I instantly assume that they frickin' deserve it now. I lost all the friends I made in college too. I'm completely friendless again, and I just have severe trust issues. This one happened to a teammate on my rowing team. He got busted for drinking, which isn't an expellable offense, but to get back at the RA that caught him, he crapped in a bag, went to the guy's first floor window, and threw it into his room. What made things worse is that the RA had a box fan in the window, and the crap hit it and sprayed everywhere in the room. Literally, the crap hit the fan. He was promptly expelled. What happened when a cop realized, oh, I think we caught the wrong guy? Oh, I've got two, from 25 years ago when I was a cop. One on one side of the badge and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 foot tall, 250 pounds, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I rolled up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself. 6 foot, 250 pounds, red hair, red beard. I made contact with him. Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants and it's time to go to jail. Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking I get his property off him, and while filling out the inventory, I happen to notice this guy is Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was this guy's landlord and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig the fact that I hadn't said his name. He just heard the familiar-sounding name as his own one. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side had just gotten off duty at 2 a.m. and was driving home still in my uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quick that I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the heck was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. Turns out my car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. In our family, we had a great uncle who tattooed his name and social security number to his shoulder. Apparently he had the same name and birthday as another guy with a prison record, and had kept hearing about it. It came in handy at least twice when he was pulled over and the cops started arresting him. Each time he got out because he had his social security as proof that he was innocent. Note to self: tattoo my American doppelganger's social security number on my shoulder. Step 2, become serial bank robber in the States. Step 3, profit. Kinda makes you wonder if anyone realized what number they were looking at when this guy went to the beach or something. 2 of my colleagues, who are murder squad detectives, attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk, there were a couple of people hanging around waiting for their solicitors. They gave the custody sergeant the name that they were there for, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced himself and said that they'd be questioning him at another station, so all 3 got in the car and headed out. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival, he'd be arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, questioned and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You've got to be joking. Attempted murder? I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later, one of the officers got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the non-murderous shoplifter, turned the car around and headed back to bring down the right person for questioning. Keystone Cops to the max. I was actually the wrong person in question. There was another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name, exact same spelling, the only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks that they didn't qualify for. They'd cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies herself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for this guy. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked them if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. It was a high-pressure situation demanding access to my financial records, threats to subpoena and further legal action. So I was starting to doubt whether this was an actual police officer or was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and record keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. I live in a neighborhood in Indiana that's going through a major revitalization right now, so it's very much in a transitional phase. We rent from a good friend of ours. He bought the house from some garbage people who'd lived there a long time ago. These people sold and made various illegal substances. There was violence, working girls, everything. In general, the house was disgusting, unlivable really, just the worst. Well, the scumbags who lived there still try to use our address even after 5 years. About a year and a half ago, one of the guys used our address to renew his driver's license at the DMV. He even had the audacity to leave a note for us to call him when the license came in. Fast forward a few months, around Christmas time, we're all sitting around watching TV when we get a knock at the door. My husband answers it, and it's a SWAT team with weapons hot. They see my husband, who doesn't look like a crystal user or smackhead, and inside are our 2 little boys, my parents, and me nursing our baby, plus the Christmas tree and all the lovely trappings of our home. They immediately put their MP5s down, and my husband and I have a lovely chat with them. Yeah, they had our house surrounded, weapons-free, the whole shebang, looking for this one guy who was wanted on some kind of violent felony. We were angry at this guy, who I refer to as Big Nasty. Oh, this one guy who definitely went through some crap being the wrong person. A Missouri man spent nearly 17 years behind bars for robbery until his doppelganger was discovered. The other guy looked so much like him that authorities decided to toss out his conviction. Jones, who was 41, had been serving a 19-year jail sentence for a 1999 robbery when he heard other inmates buzzing that another prisoner looked just like him and even shared his first name, Starr said. It's unclear what the other person was locked up for, and Jones never saw his doppelganger. But he told 2 legal interns assigned to his case about the rumors, according to Alice Craig, one of Jones' lawyers. The interns brought the message back to their superiors at Midwest Innocence Project and the Paulie Wilson Defender Project, who dug further into the case. It turned out that not only did the other man bear an uncanny resemblance to Jones, he also lived closer to the site of the crime. Jones's doppelganger, Ricky Amos, used to live with his mother in Kansas City, Kansas, near the address of the incident, Craig said. Jones lived across the state line in Kansas City, Montana. When I saw that picture, it made sense to me, said Jones, who's denied committing the robbery to the Star. Either you're going to think we're the same person or you're going to be like, man, these guys, they look so much alike. His lawyers showed the two men's photos to the victim, two witnesses, and the prosecutor in Jones's case, and all four admitted they couldn't tell the pair apart, according to the Star. Okay, the narrator did a bit of digging and found out that thankfully the innocent man in question was awarded $1.1 million in damages. I'm not sure that makes up for 17 years in prison or how much went to his lawyers in the end, but I'm glad at least he got something resembling an amount that he could maybe begin rebuilding his life with. My mum had a story like this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mum was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, the same name. They even showed my mum's actual information, which I won't list here as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now, on to my mum's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, as she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it. Lots of yelling. She hadn't seen the show, which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly, bam! Her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her one-bedroom apartment and she's arrested. She explained that they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched, DNA matched, name matched, photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mum's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mum. The end result is that when they created the profile for the criminal, they used my mum's information to start with. So, when they arrested my mum, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of the crime that they said that she'd committed and the prints didn't match that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think that if they'd used her profile prints, rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she'd still be in jail today. It was basically a life sentence for what the other lady did. I was 16 and worked at a golf course mowing lawns and such. We got a call at home from the cops that said I was a suspect in a hit-and-run accident because my plate numbers were on the car that drove away without stopping. The cops said that the car was maroon-colored. My car was grey. We told them and figured that was that. The next day at work, there was a minor accident. An idiot co-worker pulled a metal rake too hard, and the rack holding it came down onto my forehead. It wasn't a deep wound, but it bled a lot, as head wounds are wont to do. My boss took me to the ER to get my head superglued and to be safe, took me home as well. Thus, my car stayed at the golf course. That evening, a cop came by and found me with my head wound and my car missing. I looked quite guilty. By sheer luck, the cop calls someone after talking to my parents and discovers they've got the guy and the plate numbers were just kinda close. I probably would have been arrested. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The police stopped me once and asked me to get in the car because I fit the description of someone they were looking for, but they checked my ID and everything was cool. I asked them if they'd drop me home while I was in the car and said it'd be hilarious if they came to the front door with me to freak my mum out. She came to the door and as soon as she saw the police, her face was the angriest I've ever seen. It was hilarious. I was a curious little kid. My father stopped at the local liquor store to grab a bottle of wine and I was poking around. The door to the office was unlocked and I wandered inside, sat in the chair and spun around a few times, got bored and wandered out. A few days later, my father got a call from the police and we go in. As the officer was speaking to us, I proceeded to spin around in the chair and pick up and look at everything on his desk. After about a minute, the officer says, "Thank you for coming in. I see what happened. You can go." Turned out the owner's teenage son stole a few grand from the store and tried to blame it on the handsy 5-year-old. I did get felony stopped while on Las Vegas Boulevard. I left work, pulled out of the parking garage and turned right on Tropicana. I then saw lights behind me and started to pull over, thinking it was an emergency vehicle. I was then surrounded by police with weapons drawn. This was like midnight on the strip, so it was intense. The police made me get out and walk backwards with hands on my head. They cuff me and tear into my car almost immediately. Long story short, it was another Mustang with the out-of-state tags involved in a robbery. That was an intense evening. I was the wrong guy once. I was dating this girl and when things didn't work out, she got vindictive. She had a copy of my car insurance and got a guy friend to pose as me to call the police and report my vehicle stolen. I go beat-bopping out of work one glorious Friday afternoon and get felony stopped by about 10 Dallas, Texas police department officers. Guns drawn on me and everything, right outside of the large office complex I worked at. Turns out the people who reported my car stolen used their own phone number when filing the report and eventually got caught and charged. I travel frequently across the Canada-US border, sometimes by bus. On one bus trip, the whole bus was held up by one woman who was pulled back to be interrogated. An hour later, she got back on the bus, announcing there was a person on the most wanted list with the same name. However, that person was a 5'4" white male, and she was a relatively tall, probably 5'10", black woman. It took them an hour of interrogating her to realize they had the wrong person. You know, I never thought the police bias against people of color was so big that they'd make this obvious of an oversight, but there you go. Don't personal files and warrants usually have a description that they could go off? Wild. Once again, not a police officer, I was on the receiving end. I'd been at a small bar listening to some live music with a friend. We left a couple of hours later, and less than a mile from the bar, I got pulled over. No big deal. I pull into a circular driveway and then I got scared. No fewer than 4 police cars were surrounding us, 2 behind and 2 in front. They came to both sides and leave a number of officers at our windows while they run our licenses. See, earlier, in between sets, a lady got on stage and warned any women there not to walk home or accept rides from strangers. Apparently, there had been a number of abductions and unspeakable act offenses in the area. My friend and I ignored that warning. We weren't alone, and we were not women. Finally, the cops gave us our identification back and told us we matched the description of the offenders. Didn't say how they determined it wasn't us, but apologized and sent us on our way. It wasn't until the next day we realized just how bad that could have been. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. There was a really loud banging on the door. I rushed over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked multiple times before we had even heard, and opened it up to 4 police officers who pushed into our kitchen. 2 of them grabbed my husband and started telling him that he's being placed under arrest for a hit-and-run accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and he's just got home an hour before that. He must have been really convincing because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us, while 2 others went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out a car that we'd sold about a year before that was involved in an accident that hit 3 parked cars and a woman the night prior. Luckily, she only had minor injuries. But the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars, hitting a pedestrian, and the man jumping out of it shortly afterwards. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has been transferred, but it's not really enforced and there's no penalties for not doing it, because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same, to get plates, stickers and insurance, stuff like that. Obviously and stupidly, we didn't do the stuff on our end. The cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and left. The jerk that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. I was the guy. Got pulled over a block from a local McDonald's. The officer explains that he got a report that the manager at McDonald's reported that a guy about my description had tried to grab the cash drawer from the register when she opened it to make a change for him. When she resisted, he fled in a yellow Ford LTD. I happened to be driving a Ford LTD. I told him I wasn't the guy, asked if the name of the manager who reported it was Tina. Yep. Well, then she would have told you my name when reporting the attempted robbery if I was the culprit. I'd been working there as a manager for about 2 years, and she'd definitely have recognized me. He agreed that I was unlikely to be the culprit. I immediately drove over to find out what had happened from Tina. Evidently, she had went on aggro when the guy tried to grab the door and just grabbed both his hands and dug her nails into the top of his hands. Evidently, it was all the guy could do to tear himself away and flee. Tina may have weighed about 100 pounds soaking wet. I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. Wardens have police powers and can be called in if backup is needed. My teacher is a great guy and loves stories. Anyway, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying that they won a prize from the city. Apparently, however they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize, you have to go to the community center at a certain date and time, then the police get you to sign after you sign in for your prize. So in my city, they set this up and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize claiming, this very large old man comes in and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center claiming. He fought pretty damn hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of a squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important details of age. They captured senior when junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of this man's very recognizable name that there could only be one. I remember when my son was 3 weeks old. It was 3 a.m. and I was laying down on the couch, baby is in his rocker. Suddenly there's a loud knocking on my door followed by, "Police!" I thought for sure it was my friends coming home from the bar and they needed a place to crash, and they've done that police knock to me before. So I was just sitting there mad thinking, don't they know I have a kid now? Needless to say, I didn't answer the door, figured they'd find somewhere else. Next thing I know, my door was kicked down, I grabbed the baby and ran towards the door, and 4 or 5 police officers run in. They searched my house with flashlights, scared the crap out of my sleeping husband. My 5-year-old didn't wake up though. Turns out they had the wrong address. They apologized and a week later they installed a new door for me. But holy crap was that scary. There's something endlessly hilarious about a very serious and gung-ho police squad going into a house in action movie mode, then sheepishly having to walk out again apologizing. I know it must be super scary for the homeowner, but my goodness, it's a great second-hand thing to laugh about. One night around 8 p.m, my fiancé received a call. The officer calling said, "Derek, we have your health card. Tell us your whereabouts right now." My fiancé answered, "This isn't Derek." "You sound like Derek. Your buddies ratted you out and gave us your number. Now where are you?" "I'm not Derek and I'm not telling you where I am. Who are you?" "This is Officer Smith. Stop messing around and tell us your location, Derek." "Again, Derek is not my name. How do I know you're a real officer?" "Boy, if you don't tell me where you are, you're going to be in much more trouble. My badge number is," and gives a number. "Okay, fine, I'm at home at," and he gives our address. "If you don't show up in a police car, I'm not coming out." He hung up the phone, dialed 911 because we live in a bad area and weren't sure if this was a fake call or not. The operator verifies it was a correct badge number. The officer called back. He apparently misdialed by 1 number. He apologized but still blamed my fiancé because "you were being very defensive and sounded guilty." This one sort of fits. I used to work an AWOL section in the army where we'd collect soldiers that were AWOL from various jails and process them. One time we got paperwork for a guy that was supposedly AWOL since the Korean War. Both me and the LA officers had no idea what to make of it. The guy was old, I don't remember exactly how old, and obviously the paperwork we had from his enlistment was outdated, and impossible to tell from the picture if it was him or not. I mean, it was 50 years prior. The person in custody was saying he was never in the army and that it was a mistaken identity. He was Korean, and his name, particularly his last name, was not at all that unique. I think Kim, Lee, and Park account for something like 60% of South Korean last names. Socials weren't used as ID numbers back then, so we couldn't use that. We ended up just letting him go because A, we had no way to tell if it was even the right guy or not, and B, we weren't going to send a 70-year-old guy to get dishonorable discharged. Still no idea if this was the right guy. Teachers, when did karmic justice finally come to that one troublesome student? Had one who was a real monster of a kid when I taught 5th. This kid, let's call him Ray, had one of those mums who refused to hold him accountable for anything. It was always some other kid did it, or Ray was just protecting himself, Ray just wanted to fit in, Ray was being targeted. Also, she was one of those mums who'd ask Ray if he were guilty and take his no as incontestable truth. She'd say, "My son doesn't lie to me." "Oh really? Your kid doesn't lie? So it's just your kid and Jesus?" "All kids lie, lady." Anyway, I had a full caseload as a special ed teacher, so I got a paraprofessional, let's call him Steve. Ray hated Steve, had some kind of issue with male authority figures. One day, Ray got in trouble, coming back from recess, and Steve reprimanded him verbally. By the time Ray makes it to the classroom, he's saying how Steve got in his face and shouted at him. Nope. He asks to go talk to the principal. Yay, Ray's gone for at least 5 minutes. Tells the principal how Steve grabbed his arm. When Mum comes in and gets him, now he's saying Steve pushed him. Next day, we get a phone call. Ray's mum and grandma are coming in and want a meeting with Steve and the principal to discuss how Steve choked Ray. Steve's freaking out. Sure, other kids were there, but no adults and no cameras. How can he prove his innocence? I tell him, go to the meeting and before anyone says anything, have Ray share what happened. Steve came back smiling. As soon as one story came out, everyone else was disagreeing. Well, Ray told me. Oh, but Ray told me. I would have loved to see the mum's face as her kid is proven a liar in front of everyone. Had a kid that threw a lock at my head not get expelled because it just slipped out of her hand. She then got expelled a few months later for bringing a weapon to school. We should really ban assault locks. No student needs a lock with more than 3 combinations. I'm not a teacher, but one time when I was at kindergarten, a kid looked me straight in the eyes, bit himself on the wrist hard, ran to the teacher and blamed me, that little C word. They sent me to the principal's office, my mom was called down and I got yelled at and cried. A week later, the kid did it again, and the teacher saw him do it. Felt so good to have the principal apologize profusely to me while that little craphead got a mouthful from his parents. I teach college students to be teachers. My first year doing this, I had a student who was always late, turned in the bare minimum of work and always had excuses. I told him he had to improve because if he did this on the job, he'd get fired. He kept coasting and the other profs let him get by. First teaching job? He got fired. I laughed in the privacy of my office and I'm not sorry. Oh no, the consequences of my actions. Seriously, I always wonder how these kids from university who don't seem capable of basic coordination or effort get on in life. Do some of them reform? Because honestly, this seems like the natural resolution, followed by them never holding down a job. I hope some of them get their crap together. We had these 2 kids, a brother-sister combo with fabulous names. Let's call them Princess and Major. Actually, not bad kids, just a bit lazy. But the parents were the laziest Fs in town. Did anything to not work, just sat around and existed. I'm surprised they had the motivation to get off their butts and procreate twice. Anyways, there was always some excuse why homework wasn't done, and this was 4th grade in a city. So homework was stuff like reading a little booklet to your parents or practicing multiplication facts. The kids also missed school all the time. The kids were honest. Mummy didn't want to wake up and get us ready for the bus. Daddy was up late with his friends. So, we report them to truancy. The parents turn around and find some lawyer to sue the school for their kids' underachievement. If the teachers were doing their jobs, these precious children would be pre-med students by now. Luckily, we kept really good records. The lawyer shows up, the principal, superintendent, truancy officer, and our lawyer. Their lawyer starts in, but our principal breaks in, holding up his hand. He asks the truancy officer, how many days have these children missed? Turns out they'd missed enough days in the last 3 years to equate for more than a year of school. The principal says, "Now, ma'am, sir, how are we supposed to deliver a quality education to your children if you don't get them to school?" Their lawyer quietly packed up her crap and left. I interned in a class with this one kid who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was pretty smart, but not by too much. He always got paired with kids not as smart as him, so he'd always be really smug when dealing with them. We learned that he got that from his parents during a parent-teacher conference. His parents praised that boy up and down and thought he was the smartest kid in school. They built him up as that and they got him thinking that too. Then they went off on my mentor teacher. That she wasn't providing him with a high enough education, she was bringing him down, she was terrible. The conference ended when my mentor teacher left the room crying after the verbal lashing. Well, about a week later, there was an event where parents came to watch their children in class. It was to watch them do math games with other students. Well, my mentor teacher paired this smug little jerk with the actual smartest kid in class, the one who was working on more advanced classes after school. The kid got shamed. His parents were so flustered during the event, they were visibly nervous and upset looking as this kid got destroyed game after game. They left before it was all done and took him out of school for the rest of the day. I coached middle school football. Some kids have come out of their shell by the time they get there, others have not. But at least most of the early bloomers were jerks and made life hell for everyone. The team's starting halfback was one of these jerks. He gave a defensive lineman hell, and since everyone thought he was cool, they just gave him hell right along with him. The lineman was a big guy, but not aggressive or outgoing. Still just in his shell, really. He did fine out there because he was a big guy, but hardly played to his potential. The little running backs took their Napoleon complexes out on the big guy by running by him and shouting, "Pansy!" every time he failed to stop them. Rather than fight back to make the play, he'd just ignore it and line up and try again the next play. One day, the whole thing just clicked for the big guy and he started making plays. He learned to get off his blockers and form tackle and attack the ball carrier. It was a cool thing to see. He loved it. When he really started getting into a groove, I started running the jerk halfback right at the blooming D lineman and watched him plant that guy in the ground with a thud every time. It was just getting easier as I made sure they ran the same play as him, play after play. Soon, bruised and beaten, the jerk halfback asked, "How many times are you going to run this play?" And I responded, "Once for every time you called him a pansy." First grade here, had a boy that wouldn't stop hitting kids with basketballs. He'd run up and pop the ball right at students. Sometimes he'd toss it real fast and say catch, but most often he'd just throw it at children on the playground who were completely unaware. This kid seemed like he was trying to knock other children down. He'd laugh his butt off if he saw someone stumble or fall after they were hit by his basketball. After talking with his parents, we told them we'd be taking the balls away from him until after the spring break to see if his behavior improved. As promised, he was allowed to play basketball again after break, but we warned he'd better behave. It didn't even take 5 minutes before he stalked and shot that Spalding special at this poor little girl, knocking her down. She cried and pointed at him, mulch dangling from her hair. "He's mean, Mrs. Misty." I agreed and told her he'd have the basketballs taken away for the rest of the school year. As I got up and walked his way, he started to bolt. He ran out of the playground, past the sandpit and onto the basketball court. He maintained eye contact with me, and before I could take another step, a stray ball from a 5th grader hit the edge of the backboard, bounced off and hit that little jerk square in the face. He went down like a sack of potatoes. Of course, I ran over to him and made sure he was okay. He might be acting like a little turd, but he's still just a child. I called for the nurse since he was out cold. He woke up with me above him and started crying, saying he'd never do it again. "Please. I'm sorry, I won't do it again." I'll have to wait and see this coming year if karma kicked his butt enough or not, because he didn't want to pick up another basketball for the rest of the school year. I mean, I credit him with being able to put 2 and 2 together that this was what it felt like when he inflicted it on other kids. Normally, people present a breathtaking lack of understanding of the irony of these situations. But wait, did he think that this was a targeted hit that the teacher arranged to happen? Because if so, that's a little bit darkly hilarious. I had a 5th grader who looked like a white version of Cleveland Brown Jr., right down to the hanging cheeks and no neck. This kid was a know-it-all menace. He'd interrupt me, do that weird Rihanna hand twirl and say, "Well, actually, miss," and then state some random fact that was often wrong or irrelevant. Well, eventually, while on lunch duty, I saw that his lunch every day was a can of soda, a big bag of chips, and tons of candy. Like the bag is bursting at the seams. I alert the principal because I'm worried that his grandmother, who was raising him, wasn't feeding him properly. Principal calls the grandma and the grandma gets angry. She was letting him pack his own lunch and wasn't checking it. So she's embarrassed that we've called her on it. She tells us that she'll only pack healthy food now. She then tells us that the kid's doctor said he needs a serious diet change. She tells us he can't have any candy. Cue to a week later, the kid is still being a little brat and annoys another student. The student runs to principal and says the kid has been sneaking candy to school every day. The principal goes to talk to him. The kid shoves a chocolate bar in his mouth and the principal takes away the blow pop sucker that he has. The kid proceeds to roll around on his belly across the entire hallway, screeching and crying so hard that he's choking on the half-chewed chocolate bar. Chocolate spittle and tears are everywhere. A kindergarten student walks by and says, "You look like a baby." The kid stops wallowing long enough to punch the little student. He got suspended for violence, and I got a peaceful classroom. Freshman English. Busted a kid for plagiarism. He was furious and refused to drop the course. I gave him a second chance, and he continued to plagiarize. He was a slimy, smarmy kid who thought I was just a dumb, clueless teacher's assistant, but joke's on him, he ended up failing the course 3 ways: plagiarizing, exceeding absences, and failing to turn in a complete final. You can argue about 1 way to get an F, but you can't argue about 3. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Last year I had a 7-year-old in my class who was just a pain. He's the only child I've ever taught who I've actually disliked. He'd throw things around the classroom, pinch other children, stab them with pencils. He was rude to everyone and would always blame it on someone else. Talking to his parents wouldn't help because they believed everything he said, even over adults who had actually witnessed him doing it. They'd give excuses and say that other children were blaming him or that he was being picked on. There was nothing wrong with this child other than that he had been brought up with no consequences in his life. Anyway, one time he was harassing another child and I guess they'd just had enough, and this usually mild-mannered kid punched him in the stomach, causing the horrible one to wet himself. When following the incident up, all of the other children who'd witnessed it, about 5 or 6 of them, completely closed ranks and denied that it had ever happened. I don't usually condone when children hit back, it causes so many problems, but you had better believe that all the adults that had had to deal with this kid were rooting for the retaliator. I was in pre-kindergarten in the early 80s at a private Catholic school. This one kid, Amy, would always bite the other kids. I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I guess one day I came home crying or had a really bad bite mark or something and my mum was angry. She took me straight to the superintendent, not the principal, and showed her what happened. The superintendent, a really old nun, did not put up with that crap. She called Amy into her office and bit the frick out of her arm. Amy started crying, but she never bit anyone ever again. Old nuns in the 80s were hardcore. I'm not saying that what happened was right, just that it happened. College instructor here, I was teaching English 102. This little smart aleck kid was on a sports team as a student manager, and this was his life. He lived to pick up jock straps and clean lockers and all that. Well, anyway, that's fine, and I was happy for him. He sat in the front row and was always talking about stuff that happened with the team, or he was fiddling with his phone and iPod. Sometimes he was doing all of these things. He was a bit scattered. At this point, I was never really angry with him, just concerned. He was way too cool to actually do work when I gave the class time to work on their papers, and he decided he didn't need the book. I told him many times he needed to buckle down and get going. He didn't. For over half the semester. He'd just get up and leave class 15 minutes in if he decided he didn't want to stay. He'd make any class discussion hell for everyone else because he couldn't for some reason follow the thread of conversation and would ask inane questions. He was also kinda sexist and was always talking about various ways he'd cheated in classes or helped other people cheat. He was incredibly friendly though. I told him many times he shouldn't discuss these kinds of things in front of a teacher. So finally, I was telling the class that the last day to drop is tomorrow and blah blah blah. He comes up to me after class and asks if he should drop. I look at his grade, which is an abomination, and tell him, yes, I think the best course of action would be for him to drop. Well, he stopped coming to class, but he never dropped. I gave him an F. He sent me an email with a frowny face with lots of parentheses as the downturned mouth. I was teaching music. I had a flutist who was fantastic. He practiced 4 hours every day and wanted to be the next James Galway, the guy who does the fluty Shire theme in Lord of the Rings. Unfortunately, he had an ego the size of Texas. He told the girl next to him, who also wanted to be a professional flutist, that she was abysmal and a waste of life. He refused to audition for our local honor band, which was part of his grade, because he refused to lower himself to playing with such talentless musicians. He'd whine about my conducting in class when I wouldn't cue him, because I was too busy cueing the low brass who needed help with their entrances. You know, teaching instead of just letting him show off. He refused to play a theme from a popular video game at a concert, something that we play to get people to attend because we need money to keep the program going. It was apparently not artistic enough. Then he refused to show up to a concert because he was too embarrassed to be seen performing with this high school band. So he failed band and I kicked the toxic little monster out. But he was talented and he wanted to be a flutist, so he auditioned for Juilliard and made it in. This absolute dillweed quits before the first semester is over because he believed he was more talented than his teachers. He earned a symphony gig in a very well-known band thanks to a blind audition where he wasn't permitted to talk and reveal how much of a D-bag he was. That lasted 2 weeks before he dissed the very famous conductor's conducting and got his butt fired. His career is dead because he couldn't keep his ego in check, and I find it immensely satisfying. As usual, my policy is that you can forgive kids a certain amount of awful behavior because generally they grow up and cringe when they realize how terrible they were and learn from their mistakes. But this guy got multiple extra chances, plus more that our author likely didn't know about, and blew all of them, and apparently never stopped to question whether he was in fact the issue here. When I was younger, the teacher got tired of the kid who kept disrupting class, and she gave extra homework to everyone in the class except this kid and made all the students write, "Thanks for the extra homework," kid's name. Somehow he stopped believing he was cool after that. I taught a comparative anatomy animal dissection lab section back in college. I had one kid write in a section, let's call him Kevin, who never listened to dissection instructions and just dove in with a scalpel, dicing and chopping and generally mutilating most of the internal organs. His first karmic warning came when we were dissecting squid, and he got squid juice on himself. Smelled awful for the rest of that class. However, he kept ignoring instructions and hacking away, and this time, karmic justice struck on our very last dissection project, the fetal pig. Kevin really wanted to see the pig's brain. Kevin couldn't get through the skull, so he started whacking away at it with the butt of a flat pry knife. I told him to stop, but he had to give it one last mighty whack. Crack! The skull breaks and the rubbery piglet brain bits come flying out of everywhere, mostly over Kevin, splattering him. Unfortunately, while protesting my refusal to let him dice this piglet into pancetta cubes, Kevin had his mouth open. Thankfully, preserved pig brain, ingested orally, seemed to have a calming, subduing effect on Kevin for the last couple of classes. In short, don't jerk into sections unless you're willing to swallow. I once taught a grade 11 history class where I had one kid who caused me a lot of grief. He was frequently late, walking in 20 to 30 minutes each time. Class was during C slot, so he had a spare during B and would actually take the bus home after his A class and simply stay home for an hour, or just not show up at all. Additionally, he was super passive-aggressive, rarely handed anything in, and obsessed himself with spending time on his super expensive smartwatch and/or phone, which is also somewhat more of a big deal as my school is in a low-middle-income area and more than half of the students can't even afford a simple phone. Anyway, I'd pretty much had it with him. A major project comes up halfway through and he doesn't bother to do any of the group work. I weight projects around 50-50 personal input versus group mark, and then he didn't show up for the entire week of presentations. I'd had a lot of conversations with Mum at this point, who luckily had my back and was totally fed up with him too. Suffice to say, I gave him the only 0 in the class. So, of course, he hasn't learned and his grades are below failing mark. Test on the last unit before the exam is coming up, and I give the students the option to write a unit test and replace their lowest test grade with it. Obviously, every kid takes the chance. He saunters in late, and when I asked if he's going to do the op test, he just said, nope, sat down and played on his phone. I was a bit dumbfounded, but whatever. Oh, and I forgot this part. He came into class a few days later when I was handing back tests and announces, I'm ready for my retest now, Mr. Hardshank. I looked at him and said how he could possibly think that's an option, especially as I'm in the middle of handing out the answers. He says, oh, well, I just thought I could write it any time. What? How could you get that idea? I say. Oh well, you're too late. How does it feel when you shoot yourself in the foot? Hurts, I guess, huh? Later I tell him he has until the last day of classes to hand in any missed work, of which he has lots. Some of which he hands in 50% finished at best, but that's it. Too bad. Obviously, he fails his exam and ends up with like a 45% or something. I could have failed him harder, but earlier group projects didn't have a personal input weighting like the last one did. My bad. Here's the justice. He comes to my room literally begging me to give him a passing grade. Looks like he's ready to cry. How can I fail him? All of the other teachers failed him too. Can't I at least give him a passing grade so he gets 1 credit? I hella noped. Basically said it's time to lay in the bed you made for yourself and told him he can see himself out. It was satisfying. In short, a super lazy, apathetic kid gets an F in my class, and that's not the worst of his problems. In high school, we had this little bag of crap named Brandon. I only had one class with him, but that class is where the story happened. It was 11th grade geography, and our teacher was one of the nicer teachers I can remember. Brandon would always push her buttons like I'm sure he did to everyone. He'd never take it too far. I think he just loved the attention of getting the whole class to look at him or laugh at what he was doing. He'd make stupid little noises, tell stupid jokes during lecture, pretend to sleep and snore, or any other stupid irritating crap that you could think of. Our teacher, she was quite a patient lady, but you could tell by mid-year that she had had about enough of this crap as anyone. She couldn't really even punish him because Brandon loved that kind of attention and it made him all the happier. The few times he got too much, she'd give him detention and a couple of times sent him to the office, which just made him more giddy. We had very tame office staff and they'd keep him in the office for an hour or something and then just let him out. She tried everything and you could tell she was at the end of her wits. A few weeks after September 11th, some kid thought it would be funny to call in a bomb threat. They cleared the school and went locker by locker. They found nothing, of course, and we went back in. As soon as we sat down in that geography class, an office staff member came into our class, went up to our teacher and whispered something in her ear. I still remember the calm look on her face. In the most professional way, she looked over at Brandon and said, "You're being called into the office." She went on with the rest of the class completely normally. They'd found quite a bit of green herb in Brandon's locker, and as a result, he was expelled over it. I teach kindergarten and had a terrible, terrible child in my class last year. He liked to pull his desk away from the girl sitting across from him so her pencils and crayons would go falling on the floor. Finally, one day she got fed up and slammed her desk back into his. Unfortunately for him, his fingers happened to be there. I had to resist the urge to be like, "That's what you get!" But instead I just reminded him that's why I said not to move his desk away from the rest of the table and sent him to the nurse. What was a bonkers story that a suspect told a cop or security officer that turned out to be true. My dad was stopped just outside of Detroit in the early 70s, flying down the highway in a Boss Mustang. The cop said it's either stolen or repossessed. Which is it? My dad was a repo man, and it was a repo. I wish I could have seen his face. No ticket. No idea why he didn't get a ticket, actually. Obviously, repo men are subject to traffic laws. I suspect it's something about repossessing cars in Detroit proper in the early 70s. Not an ideal work site. I used to be an instructor for the security forces students in training, in this case the US Air Force cops. I was a weapon instructor, but we dealt with a lot of dorm inspections and all that other fun stuff. Well, this one kid kept falling asleep in class. After many counselings and some paperwork, he said he couldn't sleep because the devil was in his dorm room. Of course, we thought maybe he had some mental issues going on, but decided to get to the bottom of things. He said every night around midnight or later, he'd hear a voice saying to keep his eyes shut and nothing would happen to him. He was freaked out, so he complied. A couple of the instructors decided to sit with him in his room one night and told him to go to bed like he usually does. Well, lo and behold, around 1 a.m., the instructors heard something in the ceiling. They started freaking out a bit, but watched and waited. Next thing they know, they heard the voice and one of the ceiling tiles was moved and something jumped down. They flipped the F out and turned on all the lights to see what the frick was going on. Apparently, this other kid had been kicked out of the military while in training. He didn't want to go home and face his family, so every night he'd go into that kid's room, scare the crap out of him, and then take some food or something and stretch his legs for a bit. I guess he'd shower during the day but stayed up in the ceiling for the rest of the time. Needless to say, he was promptly sent home, and our freaked-out student was finally able to get some much-needed rest. A few things I want to clarify though. Yes, the kid was 18. I referred to all the students as kids since I've been in for about 15 years. All of them look like babies to this crusty old man. This happened around 2011-2012 timeframe at the firehouse, which is what we call that set of dorms. The guy living in the ceiling would say other crap to the kid, leading him to believe that he was the devil and that he'd kill his family or some other crap like that. And for those asking why an 18-year-old would be such a wuss, I have to say you'd be surprised at the caliber of students that comes through training. They don't all get weeded out in BMT, which is sad, but a lot of them do grow into fantastic airmen and eventually NCOs. I wonder if this flipped the switch on the kid's life into being more or less fine after this, or if it actually haunted him forever and caused ongoing issues. Because on the one hand, great to know that the literal devil isn't haunting you and your family. On the other, that's a long time to be tormented for. So, dispatch advises my partner and I of a 911 call where the caller advises there's a pilot who parked a plane in his yard and then went to a nearby bar. Dispatch advises the caller doesn't speak conversational English and the call was translated via a translation service. Knowing the address is on a lake, I assume that there's been a mistranslation. Someone probably drove a boat up to his dock and went to the bar. The partner calls me. He's on the crapper and is going to be a hot second. He assumes the same thing regarding translations that I do. That's cool. I arrive first. Holy crap, there's an actual plane sitting there in his driveway. Specifically, a seaplane. Apparently it was driven up the boat ramp, then turned into his driveway and shut down. I call my partner. Yeah, you need to come here and see this crap. I go to the bar nearby. Alright, who owns the plane? A drunk guy does. Apparently he was there to visit his friend, landed on the lake and taxied to his friend's driveway. Except he got the addresses mixed up apparently, and now he's been drinking, so I don't want him to move the plane. Turns out, planes are light though, and he just pushed it into the correct driveway. 3 years ago, working in our civil department, the landlord wants his tenants out and says the usual things that set off the bullcrap meter. That they're substance users, criminals, thugs, keeping a prisoner in the mother-in-law suite. The landlord himself is a slumlord, and says outrageous stuff for all of his tenants every time he wants to evict. Turns out that it was actually true in this case, at least partially. The tenants were a man and his elderly mother. They were keeping the man's developmentally challenged brother padlocked in the mother-in-law suite of the house with no plumbing or electricity. This family had been doing a rent-to-own thing with the landlord for about 10 or so years, and only recently stopped paying. Turns out they'd been feeding the brother through the mail slot in the suite's door, and the interior had no furniture besides the most disgusting mattress you can imagine. We don't know how long he'd been kept in there, but I've never seen a more revolting place in my entire life. These are not my pants. As we were cruising around town, we spotted a guy, Jim, who was wanted for questioning in relation to breaching an intervention order. He was in the passenger seat of the car with some other guy we didn't know, Bob. We pulled the car over, arrested Jim, and put him in the back of our car. As we're searching his car and searching Bob, Jim was one of our local substance dealers, I find a point of ice in Bob's pocket. So I'm telling Bob he's under arrest for substances, and he looks me dead in the eye and says, "Officer, I swear to God, these are not my pants. I almost laughed in his face. You can't be serious. That's the best you can come up with. But again, he said, I swear to God, these are not my pants. And that is not mine. Apparently, Jim and Bob had a big night drinking at Jim's house, and Bob had misplaced his pants before passing out. When they woke up, Bob grabbed the first pair of jeans he found and drove Jim into town for some McDonald's, totally unaware of the substances in his pocket. A likely story if I ever heard one. So I open up our car and ask Jim, Are they your pants? Yeah, they are. He couldn't find his own. Can you tell me anything about what was in those pants? Ah, crap. Look, the point is that I didn't actually smoke yesterday. Jim made full admissions to owning both the pants and the substances, while Bob was happily free to go. In short, arrested a guy with ice in his pocket. His defense was, those aren't my pants. They really weren't his pants. So I'm patrolling in a beach tourist destination and it's about 2 a.m., so I was on the lookout for drunk drivers. There was a guy swerving a little bit up the road. He was on a back road and there was no one else around, so I decide to check it out. I flip on the lights and the guy pulls over immediately. I start chatting with the guy and he was slurring his words. I ask, Where are you coming from? I'm just heading back to my hotel from the beach. Any reason why you're swerving? I'm on some medication from a surgery I recently had and I'm pretty tired. So I was thinking, okay, buddy. I grab his license and registration, I run it, and it comes back clean. I take a look in his back seat with my flashlight on the way back. Not only are there 2 30-packs of beer in his back seat, the floor is absolutely littered with empty beer cans. So, what's with all the beer in the back? Well, my neighbor really likes that brand of beer and he was house-sitting for us, so we're bringing some back to him as a gift. So what's with all the empty beer cans on the floor? Well, while we were at the beach the other day, we saw a part of the beach that was trashed. I couldn't leave the beach like that. Alright, buddy, you need to step out of the car. So I make him take a breathalyzer and he blows a 0.0. I make him blow again, 0.0 all the way. Keep in mind, this guy is slurring his words left and right. So I ask him if I can take him back to the hotel and I'll drive his wife back to pick up his car. He agrees. I get to the hotel and his wife was worried sick because he'd been out so late. The wife confirms that he's on medication. He goes to sleep, and as the wife and I are walking out, I start questioning her. So, I saw a bunch of empty beer cans in the back seat. Does he drink a lot? Oh no, he insisted that we spend an hour of our beach trip cleaning up the beach. He wanted to drop off all the cans at the recycling center before he went back home. He doesn't drink at all. Interesting. There were 2 cases of beer in the back seat. Oh yes, my neighbor absolutely loves that beer. Can't get it where we're from. It was easily the most surprised I've ever been. And I should add that it wasn't the medication making him swerve, he was very tired, hence why he was driven back to the hotel and not arrested. The medication only made him slur his speech. Yes, it was Youngling Lager. Oh wow, not only was this guy telling the truth, he was also a really good Samaritan who went out of his way to tidy litter off the beach. Just don't drive if you're so tired that you can't go in a straight line, folks. We had a frequent flyer who'd call in at least once a week telling us people wanted to do the deed with him and wouldn't leave him alone. We'd send someone out there and he'd always be alone and it would be unfounded. One night he called and said he was at the store and a man kept asking to give him a down-under kiss. So we go out there and no one else is there. Surprise, but he said the person left and actually gave us a license plate number that had a local address. We went out there and the address was for a funeral home. The vehicle was a hearse, and the hood was still warm. After talking to the mortician, he confessed to actually soliciting this guy. For once, he was telling the truth. A friend of my parents worked for law enforcement as a psychiatrist for a time. An older lady was brought in one day, extremely distressed and yelling how her family wants to see her locked up in a psychiatric ward and take hold of all the silver mines she owns. My parents' friend went through the hassle to check the story just to be sure. Turned out to be 100% true. That lady was not one bit crazy. This actually happened to me and I was very thankful for how everything turned out. I was 19 or 20 and went to Applebee's with some co-workers after a crappy retail shift for the half-price appetizers. They were drinking, I wasn't because I was underage. As we were getting ready to pay, a co-worker reached over for his check and knocked over a tall beer that was damn near full straight onto my shirt and lap. No problem, it was an accident, whatever. The staff helped me clean it up and we went on our way, but I was still reeking of Bud Light. On the very first turn out of the parking lot and onto the main road, I had to swerve to avoid what looked like a tire in the middle of the lane, and obviously I saw the police lights in the mirror and thought I was totally screwed. The officer very obviously smelled beer and took a breathalyzer that didn't show anything, but he still wasn't sure. He took the time to listen to my story, plus my clothes are still damp, and he took me in the back of his car back to the Applebee's to confirm the story with the staff. Luckily, they all confirmed it was just spilled beer and I hadn't been drinking. He took me back to my car and let me go. The whole process took about 2 hours between him going back and forth with his dispatch and taking me to and from the Applebee's. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to a report of a mentally disturbed person who had called the police reporting that the devil called and told him to kill people on the street and then not be alive anymore. I checked his previous police files and he had a massive history of mental health issues. He was taken to the mental ward many times and was diagnosed with a form of paranoid schizoaffective disorder. Anyways, my partner and I showed up to talk to the guy. He was sweating bullets, his eyes were darting around, trembling and totally terrified. He explained that for the past 6 years the devil called him nightly via telephone, and then when he calls for help, the police take him to the mental institute. He says the devil tells him to kill people and then self-delete. As we were about to call our mental health unit to come talk to him, the phone rings. My partner answers the guy's phone at the guy's request. Guess what? Some jerk was using a voice changer and pranking this dude with mental health issues for years, pretending to be the actual devil. I can't tell you how surreal that moment was. The poor man's face changed, kind of, like he's finally been vindicated and he knows that it's not just in his head. So, we investigated that pranker and eventually charged him. The victim of all this was so frickin' happy. I was a detective for a few years, assigned to violent crimes investigations. I got called in one night for a male victim that literally was dumped out of a vehicle at the entrance to the emergency room. He had been shot in the side right around the hip area with a shotty, but was conscious and alert. While talking to him, he wouldn't give any information whatsoever about his name or anything. While in the ER, the doctor informed me that when they cut his pants off, he had a significant amount of smack in his pocket. He initially stuck to his story, and once discharged about a week later, he was arrested for that smack. This is where the story takes the turn. He immediately dropped the "those aren't my pants" story, which is more common than anyone could imagine, but still wouldn't give any more information about what happened. He finally did give all of his personal information, though. He was from out of state and couldn't make bond. So after sitting in jail for about 4 months, he finally decided he wanted to talk about what had happened. Turns out on the night he was shot, he and some of his associates decided they were going to rob a known substance dealer. To achieve this, they dressed up as federal agents with BDU pants, full uniform-style shirts and badges. When they got to the house, they announced they were police, and as soon as he grabbed the glass door, the guy on the inside swung open the main door and fired a shotty through the outer door, striking him. Everyone ran back to the car, jumped in, and on the way, one of the other guys gave him clothes to put on so he didn't show up at the hospital with the uniform-style outfit. Every piece of his story was verified through the investigations, to include the substance dealer who had not replaced the glass door, and it was still shattered. So what's the more serious charge? Armed robbery and impersonating a police officer, or trafficking substances? Because actually I'm not sure that this guy got out of trouble any easier once they learned his crazy story was true. Then again, I guess it still fits the criteria of the video. A couple of rednecks on suspicion of murder tried to sell me on some ridiculous story. Said a group of college kids just showed up and started self-deleting all over their property. They must have thought I was some kind of moron to believe a story like that. This is a Tucker and Dale vs. Evil reference. Great movie. I work in air pollution control. One of our actual officers got an anonymous complaint call through the tip line about a body shop that didn't have the right equipment, was operating without a permit, that kind of stuff. Met the officer out there to inspect the place and see what's up. As I was pulling in, the shop's yard was a mess. Random wrecked cars all over the place, bits and pieces of engines and such under tarps, or just casually laying on a pallet. There's a small pile of tires in one corner. All it's missing is a chained-up Doberman and a razor wire fence. I was glad I had an officer along with me. We walked into the shop proper, and it's even more cluttered than the yard. There's bits and pieces of at least 3 different cars in old milk crates, and 2 different vehicles in various states of disassembly on the shop floor. I told the owner why we're there, and he's kinda confused. Says he has a paint booth that he loans out to a buddy who does his painting for him, but he doesn't do very much work. We go through the whole speech about changing filters and such, and the guy is even more confused. He swears he just bought new filters for the thing. Those things are quite expensive. And he says again that he doesn't do all that much paint work. I'm not buying it given the state of the shop and the yard, so I ask to see the booth. He walks us into another building, and there's an absolutely beautiful paint booth in there. Everything is clean and the filters are in good shape. He's got the right sort of paint applicators, and all of his containers are covered and the ventilation is hooked up properly. There's not the faintest whiff of paint, let alone some sort of odor worth calling the tip line to complain about. I couldn't find anything to cite as a violation, and there wasn't even anything to warn him about. One of the better body shops I've ever been in as far as housekeeping goes. Now, we're all confused. The officer asks the guy if anyone from any other agency had been out to visit lately. The guy says no. Then we ask if maybe he fired someone lately, since sometimes former employees who get fired will call to complain and try to get their old boss in trouble. Again, the guy says no, just him and his dad that work in the shop, and his buddy that comes to paint. We all scratch our heads, trying to figure out who called in the complaint because there's nothing wrong here. On the way out, the officer casually remarks that he'd like to get his hands on a Camaro like that one over there. That's when the light bulb went off. Turns out the owner of the Camaro was unhappy with the speed of progress on his car. The shop owner had been working on it for free as a favor and had gotten bogged down with actual paid work, so he hadn't had the chance to finish it. They'd apparently argued about it a few days before we got the call, and the rest is history. I was lucky some law enforcement officers saw this happen to me, or I might have been otherwise in trouble. I was on my way to a party with some beer cans and a shopping bag. I decided I should open a beer on the way, only before I do I spot some cops standing close by. So I changed my mind about the beer since public drinking is illegal here. I put the beer back in the bag, still looking at the cops, so I miss the bag and it falls on the ground and a small pebble punctures the can, causing it to spray. Panicked about the beer, I pick it up and try to block the hole, but spraying beer all over myself instead. After some quick thinking, I figure opening the can would actually alleviate the pressure from the hole, and I was right. Only now I'm standing somewhere in public with a half-opened beer can in hand, in broad view of the police, and I'm reeking of beer. Apart from being sober, it sure looked like I was drinking in public. Those cops didn't bother me about it at all. My two buddies hike at night. I don't know why, and in our state you can get trespassing charges for being out after dark in parks. They saw a park ranger, they assume looking for them since they parked in the lot. After backtracking about 1.5 miles, they have this dumb idiot idea. The one buddy starts running back up the trail screaming, "Help, there's a bear chasing me." The other buddy is running up the trail making a bunch of bear noises. I don't know how that would go. As my buddy is reaching the ranger, he's like, "Run the other way, there's a bear!" And the ranger runs out of the woods with him. I was a counter-narcotics operator who'd deploy with the US Navy and Coast Guard. One trip, we were just patrolling the coast off Guatemala with intel on a suspected trafficking boat. We locate a radio contact in the vicinity and launch a small boat, a 19-footer, with interdiction team. It was an unannounced nighttime boarding, so the idea was speed, surprise, violence if action. Got close, within 30 feet undetected, turned on all the spotlights and strobes and began yelling for all people on board to put their hands in the air. The only person on board was hanging over the opposite side and wouldn't put his hands up. Several times he was instructed to do so or possibly be hurt if he refused. In all the yelling and confusion, no one heard what he was trying to tell us. Finally, the dust settled and everyone took a breath, and the man explained he couldn't put his hands up because he'd caught a shark and was losing most of his fishing equipment. I went over and saw that he had indeed got a 5-foot shark fighting just over the side. We helped him pull it up a little and he beat it to death with a baseball bat. Saved all of his tackle. Didn't find any illegal substances, though. This is one of those stories that would have actually made a lot more sense if the guy was on substances, because why on earth would you try and bring in a relatively big shark if you have the wrong size hooks and only a baseball bat to try and remedy the situation? I live in a small town in Australia. This guy was out fishing in the bush when an elephant goes running past. So he reports it to the cops, who proceed to laugh and ask what he's been smoking. The next day, someone came in to report a missing elephant. Turns out some circus elephants had been retired to a local farm. Night shift in an extremely rural part of the home counties in the UK, about 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. The call comes in that someone's pulled up to the victim in a white Range Rover, jumped out and held our informant up with a sawn-off shotty, and their iPhone was taken about 30 yards from their own front door in a quiet residential street. We turn up to the informant's address and I weirdly remember the street but can't place it. I go inside and the informant is on the internet looking at new iPhones. Slightly suspicious. We talk and he tells me about what's happened. He doesn't seem fazed at all. As we're talking, I remember the street as I was there a few months ago for a burglary a few doors down, and he had recommended that the owner get CCTV. I go over there and sure enough, there's a CCTV camera above his garage. I wake him up and view it. Sure enough, it happened. Everything. Got the registration of the vehicle, and the RO was arrested for armed robbery. The weapon turned out to be a replica, but it was just so bizarre. You wouldn't believe how many calls we get about people accusing someone else of tricking them into drinking pee. It happens at least once a month and sometimes once a week. One time it was true and we went after the guy. Some prankster called a hotel, got the guest to think he had a transmitted disease, and needed to bring a cup of pee down to the front desk. He told them not to cause an alarm, so just put it on the desk and walk away. Then the guy called the front desk and said that he was a sport drink CEO and had a new energy drink for him to test out. The guy drank pee. It went viral and there have been a few copycats out there. There's nothing funny about making someone drink pee, people. Identical twins. What happened when you were mistaken for your twin? My twin brother recommended a restaurant to me. Said that he and his wife went there all the time. Good food, really friendly staff. So, I took my wife there. Food was as advertised, but the service, somewhere between cold and openly hostile, like they resented our presence. I was puzzled by the contrast between what I'd heard and what I saw. Suddenly from the front of the restaurant there was an explosion of laughter and much rapid talking. Suddenly the waitress is there smiling and everything, just as my brother and his wife walk around the corner. So the restaurant thought my brother was cheating on his wife with some blonde. Yeah, it's funny now. Not a twin, I'm just Asian. Constantly asked about work projects I'm not involved in. Realize coworkers think that I'm just the other Asian guy. Oh god. In college I was working on a group project and randomly assigned teams. We had an Asian team member, and it was a pretty big class of about 60 students. During the first class, after being assigned groups, we broke up into our teams to begin planning, and I noticed that the Asian kid looked a bit lost. So I waved him over, figuring he'd got confused among all the moving around. Anyway, we began delegating out our work and responsibilities and exchanged contact info. Everything was going well until we were joined by our real Asian group member who was running late. At that point, pretty much everyone in the group busted out laughing. I went to a party once, and my bald identical twin bro had yet to arrive. His girlfriend was already there, so I gave her the obligatory friendly hug, then sat on the other side of the room to hang out. This other guy, a mutual friend of his and hers, kept staring at me, then staring at her, with this real nervous, what the frick look on his face. For about 15 minutes, every so often the guy would look around nervously and then furiously text on his phone. Then my brother arrives. He kisses his girlfriend and says hi to everyone, and the guy who'd been staring at us just blew up. Jesus, was no one going to say anything? What the frick was that? I thought he grew a full head of hair in a day. Not me, but a coworker has 2 sets of twin daughters. A younger pair are identical and both work at the same McDonald's. The manager often puts one on the pay window and the other on the food window just to mess with customers. That's phenomenal. If only you could get just a couple more, maybe you could make people think that McDonald's had perfected human cloning. I only hope that right now some of the customers think that one staff member is sprinting around running the whole joint like a cartoon character. I'm not an identical twin, but I am married to one. When I was dating my wife, she and her twin sister had a bunch of friends over. I walked over to her and put my arm around her and she leaned into it. I leaned in for a kiss and she pulled away. I thought, well, maybe she's just not comfortable with a little peck in front of our friends, since we haven't been dating for too long. Then I scanned the room and made contact with my girlfriend. I looked back in awe that I had my arm around her sister, who was messing with me until things went too far. I then tucked my tail between my legs, walked over to my girlfriend, put my arm around her and said, well, will you give me a kiss? Smooth cover, right? My twin brother had a huge stash of adult magazines in his closet, and I always wondered where he got the money to buy them. One night I walked into a nearby convenience store with some friends, and the guy behind the counter threw me out. I had no idea why. When my friends asked, he told them he'd caught me stealing adult magazines the week before. I'm not a twin, but my brother and I look startlingly similar, even being almost 2 years apart. I've been ranted at by teachers, faculty, and other members in grade and high school for being in the wrong room, or this isn't your lunch schedule, or had people get furious that I didn't know what they were talking about for homework or sports practice or whatever. What takes the cake, though, is that I had leg surgery in high school, and someone called me out for faking my injury because he saw me at practice at night and in a wheelchair during the day. Don't flip out at somebody in a wheelchair at school. Seriously, who fakes broken legs to be cool? My twin had recently decided he didn't want to be alive anymore, and I was at a bar drinking away my rage, and a friend of his came up and flipped out at me, saying how awful of a prank it was, and took everything I had not to remove their teeth with my fist. My father is an identical twin. He was mistaken for my uncle while walking with a woman hand in hand down the street in London, England. The witness was a friend of my aunt and immediately called her to accuse her husband of infidelity. She was at that moment sitting beside my uncle in Ontario, Canada. I was dating a girl in college. The first time I went to her house, she opened the door, I told her that I liked what she'd done to her hair and kissed her. She kissed me back, we went inside, and then she yells, "Your boyfriend's here," and walked away. They were weird girls. My brother and I dated twins way back in the day. They used to do crap like this to us all the time. Frickin' weird, you don't even know. I've been called my twin sister's name my whole life, so one day I accidentally introduced myself to someone as her. When I caught and corrected myself after, they thought I was straight up crazy for not knowing my own name. Oh boy, I dated one of two identical twins. They used to play pranks on me where they'd pretend to be the other one or switch places to test me. That all stopped when I walked up to the wrong one, grabbed onto her butt, and told her some of the very explicit things I planned for her booty later that night. Needless to say, one twin found it hysterical while the other less so. Pretty much for the following 3 years we dated, the other twin used to say, "Good night and guard your booty," every time we went to bed. When we were in the 6th grade, my brother decided he wanted to stay at home because he wasn't feeling well. So far, there had never been a day where only one of us was at school, but I didn't think anything of it. I was walking down the hall and all of a sudden I was pulled in by a teacher who I'd never seen before and she started yelling at me, and I mean yelling, because I'd skipped her class and I had the audacity to walk in front of it right after. It was really awkward to just say, I have an identical twin brother. My name is Joseph. She, of course, thought that I was making a terrible excuse, and I had to go get another teacher that knew I had a brother to come tell her that I was telling the truth. She never bothered me again. Other than that, we've never had a super embarrassing story. A friend and his wife went to the supermarket every week. His identical twin also goes there with his wife. One day, after summoning up the courage, the cashier pulls my friend's wife aside and says, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I've seen your husband here several times with another woman." We were out with friends, and he decided to go to one of the back rooms which was set up for a private party with bottles of spirits everywhere. Well, he decided to take a bottle and run off. Cut to me in the club, and some bouncers came up and took me to the back room saying, "Ah, you're screwed, mate. We saw you on camera stealing a bottle." Blah, blah, blah. I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about, and they thought I was just playing dumb to get away with it. "Yeah, nah, you can stop it, mate. We've got you on camera." Somehow I finally convinced them I had a twin, so they fished him out and eventually said we need to come back tomorrow to settle the damages. Well, obviously we weren't doing that. Fast forward to about 2 weeks after, I was staying at my girlfriend's mum's house and got woken up by her mum at 6 a.m. "Hey Mish, the police are here." What? I got arrested and put in the police car where my twin was already sitting. Interviews, long waiting, disappointing polystyrene lunches, and got off with a warning. Thanks, John. I have twin friends who went to separate high schools and switched places on April Fools. Not embarrassing, but totally worked. My friend said hi to his brother one morning. Well, it turns out his brother was actually his own reflection in a window. His mum witnessed this and has never let him live it down. I mean, considering how many times I've scared the hell out of myself by walking past a mirror, I think the parameters set by having a twin make something like this completely reasonable. My friend Daniel got caught tickling his pickle. He said he was his twin, Alex. Some girl decided to suggest that I date a guy that looked very, very much like me. Yes, those were her words. "There's this guy who looks so much like you. You two should get together." What's his name? Paul? "Yeah, you've met him?" "Yes, that's my brother." My father spent a year abroad before returning to enroll in the same college as his twin brother. The first few days were pretty standard. Acquaintances of my uncle mistaking my dad for him, business as usual. That is until one girl approached him, publicly mind you, and with a wink said, "You were really great last night. I gave your number to a few friends. I hope you don't mind." Naturally, my dad went from there to immediately seek out and congratulate his brother on his good fortune, and hopefully share some of the spoils. On the way, he found himself receiving a disproportionate level of sly smiles and sidelong glances from some of the groups he'd passed. By the time he finally found my uncle, he was thoroughly perplexed. Surely his brother couldn't have been this lucky. They were good-looking guys, but this was just ridiculous. My uncle flushed and faltered when confronted by my dad. He stammered and tiptoed around the issue before my dad finally got it out of him. How had he pleased so many women to establish this reputation? He hadn't. Turns out my uncle had spent all of his money in the first few weeks and had turned to desperate measures for cash. He had been working as an exotic dancer, mostly doing private parties, but naturally word had got around. So, for the rest of the year, my father had to contend with the fact that a good number of the people on campus had effectively seen him in the buck. Not a twin, but a mistaken identity. I was working at a local grocery store as a cashier. My next customer was a lady, maybe mid-30s. She walked through my line, looked at me and said, "When did you start working here?" About a year ago, I guess. "Does your dad know you work here?" "I sure hope so, since my mom works in the pharmacy." A look of pure shock ran across her face as she gasped, "Oh my god, I thought you were my son." I didn't know how to react and I just stared at her. "You look just like him. This is strange." "Well, a little, since you're his mom," and I laughed. I never saw her alleged son to know if we looked that similar, and every time after that she had come to my line and called me Junior. That was when it got weird. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My twin's boyfriend tried to kiss me. I'm a straight man. Well, my friend Alex got caught tickling his pickle. He said he was his twin, Daniel. My grandmother was an identical twin. Her sister passed away before I was born. She didn't like to tell stories from when she was little, but she did tell me more than one mistaken identity story. She was in their bedroom one night when they were really young and saw her sister through the window. She started talking to her sister to see why she was outside at night. Then she realized it was her reflection. My grandmother had mistaken herself for a twin. One day I was looking through her photo albums and came across some pictures of her twin in her coffin. That picture haunted me until I actually had to see my grandmother in her coffin. What's strange from all these stories for me is how many people are clueless their friend has a twin sibling. I mean, of course you don't go around explaining to everyone that you're a twin. However, to go through school, where your twin also attends, and to have friends that know you pretty damn well, still not have any idea that you have a twin sibling? What's going on? I have two younger cousins who are identical twins. They grew up being the boys for pretty much all of their childhood, and they did everything together. They're a lot alike, so they'd always get mixed up, sometimes even by their parents. After hitting the teenage years, they both actively started wanting to separate, to the point that they had radically different haircuts. One has a man bun, for example, and they attended separate high schools. They're tired of being so closely associated. Because of that, they don't like to introduce themselves as twins, and I doubt they feel the desire to volunteer that information either. I'm sure this is the case for many other identical twins as well. I worked retail for a few years and had a lot of regular customers. This one girl would come in and she was awesome. She loved the product, always made conversation over what she was doing, what she had done, and we always connected. Sometimes she'd initiate the conversation, sometimes I would. Never really learned her name though, which is pretty embarrassing in sales. About a year and a half after knowing her, she walks in one day and I wave to her, she excitedly waves back. All of a sudden, a perfect frickin' clone in a similar outfit but different colors walks out from behind her. My jaw literally dropped. I was in disbelief. I'd been talking to two twin sisters, thinking they were the same person for over a year. When I asked why they never pointed it out to me, one goes, "Well, you just seemed to talk to me like you knew me, so I went with it." It was a surreal experience, honestly. I'm not a twin, but my boyfriend is. We were walking to class when a girl approached us. She confronted my boyfriend about why he stopped talking to her or hanging out with her. At first, it was extremely awkward for me, but I figured out what was going on and I laughed it off. Turns out she was a crazy girl that his brother once saw and talked to one time in their dorm laundry room and didn't talk again after that instance. A family friend was in the Air Force, and while in boot camp, she became mortal enemies with another woman who'd constantly try to one-up everyone and win any argument for whatever reason. Our friend found her sleeping around with some other officers a few years later and got her discharged from service because of it. 10 or so years after that, our friend's twin was walking around town on the opposite side of the country, and this woman barges across the street and starts berating her for ruining her life and all this other stuff. And the twin just laughed it off because she knew it was probably her sister's fault. It says a lot about the Air Force twin that the other one was so ready to believe that her sister was the cause of ruination in someone's life. I know that she could already assume that strangers who came at her claiming shared events that she didn't know about were in fact thinking of her sister, but to be ready to laugh rather than be shocked about something like this, it had to have happened before. My flatmate and I dated identical twins while in university. Nothing happened. No hijinks. If you're a twin, you're bound to eventually have a few embarrassing stories. My whole life has been a system of awkward hugs or ducking a kiss from a girl and yelling, "Wrong one, wrong one!" Your brother's girlfriend jumps in your lap while you're watching a movie? It happens. My personal favorite has to do with situations that have occurred due to mistaken identity with my brother, now that he's a Marine officer. I joined the Peace Corps shortly after he became an officer. Yeah, we're a sitcom setup, and I worked as a teacher in Eastern Europe. Over drinks at a dinner during my service with friends of my host family, one of the gentlemen tells me that he used to be a Soviet helicopter pilot and asks me if I'd like to see his uniform. He brings down the full outfit in all of its medalled glory. We're almost exactly the same size and he lets me try it on. Thinking how cool this is, I post a picture online wearing it to show everyone. My brother calls me a few days later, angry as hell, because during his screening for security clearance, someone finds pictures of him wearing perfectly tailored Soviet regalia. He yells at me for getting brass up his butt and complains that he might get his clearance postponed. We still laugh about it. It was during those awkward middle school days and my twin sister got her first boyfriend. We had our first 8th grade dance and thought it would be so funny to switch places with each other to see if her boyfriend noticed. He didn't and proceeded to go in for the big first kiss. That didn't go so well. They broke up and it was an emotional 2 weeks for my poor little twin. Oh, middle school. My 2 friends are twins, 1 boy, 1 girl. We rented a house in Wildwood, New Jersey after our senior prom. The girl twin brought her boyfriend and the boy twin brought his girlfriend. Me and the boy twin were sitting on the couch of the house when the girl twin's boyfriend came home from a run, leaned over the couch and gave the boy twin a kiss hello. He didn't realize what had happened until he stood up. It was hysterical to me because the twins resemble each other, but not enough to make that mistake. I was on a date for over an hour before she realized I wasn't my brother. My brother had been in a committed relationship for over a year, and the date just assumed he was on this date to cheat on her. A while back when I was in middle school, I went over to one of my good friend's house. His mum comes in, we start talking about random stuff, and then she asks my name. I'd known this woman for 5 or 6 years at this point, so I was kinda confused. The conversation continues for a very awkward minute or two, and then my friend's mum walked in as well. I didn't even know she had a sister until that day. My mum and aunt are identical twins, and my girlfriend's parents own the only restaurant in my small town, and they've told me how they thought my mother was having an affair. Also, I've got texts from friends that my mother was with another man. I send a picture of my uncle, and it's always him. Let me preface this by saying I'm a junkie, smack addict, and I'm still just sober now. It was 2008, I'd just got out of rehab and I was invited by my brother to join a gym he went to for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was smoking a cigarette outside and a guy got aggressive with me and he told me to put it out or he'd choke me out. I felt threatened and I threw the cigarette at his eyes and got a cheap shot and knocked him out. Turns out he was a friend of my brother's who was a brown belt instructor at that gym. A good friend of mine is a twin. I only know one of the twins well, and I've spoken to the brother maybe twice in 15 years. My friend is the wild twin, and the brother is very laid back. I live in a big town of more than 100,000 people, with plenty of pubs and clubs. My friend ended up getting barred from most of them over a period of a few months, and then started drinking out of town. His twin didn't know how bad it was until he was out one night with his wife, and the bouncers let him in anywhere, much to his wife's fury. The twin tried to tell the bouncers, "It's not me, it's my twin." That didn't work at all. It eventually was settled when he rang his brother, made him come into town, and went around every bar to the bouncers to prove that he wasn't the banned twin. They took note of his ID, kept the ban on my pal, and let his twin go on enjoying his night. One bouncer joked with them both and said he had heard that story hundreds of times and never thought he'd see the day where it was true. Yes, I love telling twin stories. When I used to live at home with my parents and sister, I was blow-drying my hair in our bathroom. I was in my bra and undies because God it gets hot in there and I'd just gotten out of the shower. I cracked the door an inch to get air. I was busy drying and I see my sister's boyfriend coming into the bathroom. He wasn't over before and I was like, hey? And when I turn, he freaks because he thought it was my sister. He was at the door waiting until my sister noticed him, which backfired because it obviously wasn't her, it was me. It was more embarrassing for him because he felt bad. It was an honest mistake. Other times I'll be out and about and people will come up and hug me out of nowhere. I love the hugs, but it's more embarrassing for the person when they realize I'm not my sister. I don't think it's a big deal, but they're always so apologetic. My brother and I both entered into the science fair. Before the awards ceremony, he got sick, so I went with just my mum. My brother won first place, and I didn't place at all. When they called his name, my mum made me go up for him. I stood on a stage, looked out at the sea of friends and teachers clapping for me while a medal was hung over my shoulders and a certificate was shoved into my hands. In the moment, I should have felt proud of my brother, but instead I just started crying on stage and weirded everyone out. I think they must have thought I was just overwhelmed with happiness, because even when I stepped off the stage and made a beeline for the back door, people continued to congratulate me and try to shake my hand. It was such a bizarre emotion, like a blend of jealousy and shame. I walked straight to the back, past my mum, and left. In middle school, we had two boys everyone knew were identical twins. At lunch, twin A had been arguing with this group of boys talking crap just to rile them up. Afterwards, they went down the hall towards his locker wanting to kick his butt. While they were on the warpath, twin B just happened to turn the corner and run into that group of boys, completely oblivious about what had just happened at lunch because they had different class schedules. Twin B got his butt kicked for his twin's actions, not knowing the reason behind it. When was a job applicant perfect until you Googled them? Hiring private tutors to work with middle school students. Had a great conversation with a girl. She stressed how much she wants to be a role model for young girls, basically exactly what we were looking for. Then I Googled her, and the first picture on her Facebook is her doing a line. I wasn't the hiring manager, but my teammate was. A candidate came through that he and some other members interviewed and seemed pretty okay for the job until they checked her out. Turns out she was already suing the company, yes, the one she applied for a job for, so my teammate ended up not going with her in the end. This kid, early 20s, comes in for a job and seems normal enough. Google him and he was wanted in another state for stabbing a St. Bernard to death. I was interviewing a much older guy for a similar position of mine. Everything seemed okay and he was our best candidate. Before moving forward, I did a quick Google search only to find out that he was fired from his previous job because of stealing $5,000 worth of computer equipment. My director hired him anyway. Did everything work out? The original poster can't answer because he got his computer stolen. I wasn't the hiring manager, but I was talking to him about a couple of interviews he had coming up. He said that he looked up one guy and found out that he'd been arrested previously for various identity theft and credit card fraud crimes. This position involved taking payments from customers, among other things, so obviously this guy would not be hired, but that had to have been an awkward interview. I was a restaurant manager and the owner hired this guy as a chef without doing basic research. This happened a few times. Anyway, the guy said he'd won several awards and worked with celebrities, stuff like that. And he was a total jerk to everyone on staff. I decided to Google him myself. First hit is a mugshot from a substance arrest. Then more articles, one concerning how he lied about getting a James Beard award from a previous restaurant he'd worked at. A comment about him owing $25,000 or something to his former boss. The only positive restaurant review he had was from 1990. I came in after the weekend to show my boss this stuff and learned he'd already been fired the night before for exposing himself to one of the waitresses. What do we even do before Google? Silver lining is that in this day and age, at least this sort of guy is going to have a tougher and tougher time finding places that will take him on with that very public track record. I worked for a staffing agency. A guy is hired and comes in for background and substance screening. He has lots of priors, but he was working in a kitchen, so we got the okay to continue the process. It wasn't until the substance screening that he seems to get a little nervous. I tell him that we're going to do the screen now, and he asks to put it off until Monday. Typically, we'd want to do it same day so they could start work, but this was like 4:45 on a Friday and we just wanted to go home, so we said yes. Monday rolls around and he shows up. He takes the test and it comes up positive for green herb, white snow, and a bunch of other stuff. We told him that we test multiple things and that white snow also showed up. We asked him if that was a surprise. He told us, "I do dabble in that, but I just thought this was a test for Mary J." We politely said that we couldn't hire him. There are so many weird stories from working at a staffing agency, believe me. This was back in the pre-Google era, but I think it fits the question. Family owned a trucking company. Literally everyone in my immediate family has or had a commercial driver's license. It was Mum's turn to take the newbie for a road test pre-hire. During that road test, they were involved in an accident. They were hit while stopped, so it wasn't actually his fault. The company was based out of Indiana. The accident happened in Illinois. The newbie gets arrested on the spot. We came to find out he has warrants that hadn't been out long enough for the background check service we used to get them yet. One of the warrants, stalking a female dispatcher from the previous trucking company he worked for. So yeah, the police came just to take the accident report, did standard wants and warrants check, and homie got a new set of bracelets. Had a guy apply for an entry-level post with us recently. His CV was okay, so we offered him an interview. Social media seemed okay too. He never turned up for the interview. Couple of weeks later, there's a story about him in the local paper. Turns out he was living at the local boarding house and was found in the kitchen one morning, totally wasted, wearing nothing but a pair of socks. When a couple of women who also lived there tried to escort him back to his room, he got violent and attacked them. Given the dates stated in the paper, he didn't turn up because he'd been in jail at the time of the interview. His resume has now been added to the Do Not Touch with a 10-foot barge pole section in our filing cabinet. Oh, I've got a good one. We had hired a new entry-level graphic designer. Let's call him Will. He had talent and a decent portfolio, but there were some strange things right from the beginning. For example, he'd always come in wearing expensive suits, despite us being a jeans and t-shirt office, and he had a very low-paid position. We didn't care too much about that. No clue how he affords that wardrobe, but that's none of our business. He's a designer, and I guess he likes to look nice. The weirdest thing was that he adamantly refused to accept direct deposits for his paycheck. He wanted a physical check every other week. Strange, but okay, designers are just eccentric sometimes. So one evening we were all working really late on a project together. We've got some bottles of wine around, some pizzas. It's miserably long hours, but we're a good team and we're having a good time. All of a sudden, Will looks up from his computer and frickin' runs as fast as he can out the door. Not a word to any of us, he just dashes out. We all look at each other and try and call him. No answer. We finish up the project and go home wondering still what had just happened. The next day, Will doesn't come into the office. He doesn't come in the next day either. We try calling his emergency contact, but don't get any response from that either. So we Google him, and that's when we see the FBI press release. Turns out he was arrested about 500 miles from our office a few hours after he ran out. I guess he got a tip that the FBI was onto him and decided to make a run for it. His scam was pretty weird. He exploited a gimmick in how direct deposits work. Most payroll companies at the time would deposit the salary and shortly afterward withdraw the funds from the employer's bank account. So, he'd set up fake companies with a few highly paid fake employees, set up a fake bank account for them, and then set up direct deposits. When the payroll came through, he'd quickly transfer the funds to his own account and then disappear. He did this 3 or 4 times with different companies, as I understand. It's a stupid scam and easy to track, which is why he got caught. I don't recommend that you try it, especially now that most systems work differently. Turns out he'd been defrauding payroll companies for years, to the tune of about $1 million. That's why he didn't want direct deposit for his paycheck. What he didn't know was that we processed our physical checks through the same payroll company as our direct deposit, and they reported his new address to the FBI. Whoops! As far as I know, he wasn't trying to scam our company. He was either trying to hide out for a while, or he'd burned through his stolen money and needed to get a job. I hired a girl and she interviewed well, but the first day she threw up some red flags. I figured maybe I was misjudging or misinterpreting. People started missing money, and one day one of my belongings disappears, which had never happened prior to her hiring. She was insulting everyone and making customers uncomfortable, and I wanted her gone. Less than 4 full weeks from her start date, but I didn't want to pay unemployment. I finally do a search. There are arrest records in multiple states involving domestic attacks and theft. She ended up saying she could just commit the unspeakable act on one of my barely legal employees, so I was able to fire her based on that. Lesson learned. Check everyone out no matter how well they interview. I guess not. You heard it here, folks. Doesn't matter if they're Ivy League, a gleaming golden personality, and multiple photos of them handing off large checks to charitable organizations. Google those people and find out if they're secretly running illegal distilleries with child labor. I used to manage a group home for developmentally disabled adults. I was in charge of hiring the staff that we needed to make the house run properly. I saw a name come across my desk that I had to interview, and I instantly looked them up. Turns out, this was a girl that had an obsessive crush on me from years ago, and on her social media it looked like she still did. I was in a panic because she was basically stalking everything I did, and I really couldn't back out because it was 5 minutes before the interview. She came in and it was so weird. She acted normal. We interviewed in a professional manner for about 15 minutes. I showed her around and thought, wow, maybe she's done some maturing. I should just let this go. Then we got back to my office. I started a sentence like, well, Linda, it's been a pleasure having you here, and oh, no, we aren't done yet. You think you can ignore everything like you don't know what's going on? I know where you work now. I know where you live, and I'm going to keep calling. There was more she was saying while I told her to kindly leave, but a phone call to the police, as well as a restraining order, kept her away from my work and my life. I was hiring for our night shift, like shifts ending at 2 or 3 a.m., and she was willing to work anything and looking for about 25 hours per week. This was absolutely what the company was looking for. She had mentioned that she was grieving her little boy who passed 2 weeks ago and needed to do something to occupy her time. She finished her 1 day of computer training and stopped showing up after that. Later in the week, she sent me an email saying she wasn't ready to come back to work like she thought, which was actually understandable. My assistant manager and I decided to look her up, only to find out that she had multiple GoFundMe pages set up for her sob story with different amounts of time that the supposed child had been dead for. Her Facebook was full of selfies and party photos. She ended up asking for the job back a few months later, and we shot her down pretty quick. I recently Googled her name and found that all the GoFundMe pages had been taken down and her social media profiles deleted and privatized. The story took place early last year. Where I work, they hired a guy who was great at the job and a nice, quiet employee. His background check took forever to clear for some reason, but it ultimately came back clean. Eventually, he said he needed to take a day off for court, but he just never came back after that day. Upon looking into it, he had been found guilty of very inappropriate behavior with a minor on more than one occasion. That must have been why it took so long to come back. They were unsure if it should be reported since it was pending. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, we had a near miss. It was a senior hire. We were talking about him and how something seemed a little off when we Googled him. It was like he didn't exist at all, and then the odd super positive tidbit of information that was always a bit too much of a stretch to be completely believable. I mean, one or two people saying that you're the best thing on earth is one thing, but this was like all you've got with these sporadic, hyper-manic observations. One of the junior members of the team pipes up at this point. She's overheard what we're talking about. Turns out she's worked the last two places he worked at, and he's like a locust. He's extremely good at his job, but an absolute nightmare in all other ways. Misconduct, bullying, turning up wasted. He has a really niche skill set, and there are always more roles than people to fill, so he hops along, bullies everyone out of their role in his team, brings in his entourage to the point where almost anyone normal rage quits because the atmosphere is so toxic, and then when HR try to step in, he hits them with a constructive dismissal case and drags lawyers in, so there's no paper trail. She said he'd done it at her last job and the one before that. It's one of those things that once you know, you start to notice stuff. So at events when someone mentioned this guy's name, half the table would just give each other a look, and others would have no idea. It's not quite an open secret, but it's definitely on the grapevine anecdotally, if not formally. I'm so glad we dodged that bullet. I heard we'd hired a new guy, so I looked him up on LinkedIn. Turns out he was just leaving a job where my father-in-law worked. I sent Pops a text and asked him about the new hire and opinions on him, and didn't get an answer. When I went for dinner the following weekend, I asked again. Turns out this new hire said he was leaving his former job to go and take care of his ailing mother in Africa. His former company said not to worry about it, take an unpaid leave and come back when you can, however long that takes. I went in on Monday and told my boss. He didn't fire him immediately, but when he didn't perform well in his job after a couple of months, he got canned, and then proceeded to go back to his former company and tell them he was back from Africa. They did not rehire him. I was the intern responsible for checking references and running backgrounds at our company, and this was in my first week where I was just learning how to go about things. This guy did great in the interview, so I got the go-ahead to run a background check and call his references. Something popped up in his background, so I had to call the police station to figure out how to get a copy of the police report, since whatever happened had just happened. I talked to someone on the phone and gave them his name, and who I was and what I was calling for. After doing so, whoever I was talking to didn't know how to go about obtaining the information on her end. She put me on a brief hold, then took a callback number and promised to call me back with some info. Well, it's a good thing neither of us knew what to do because I received a call from the police department less than an hour later. An officer told me, "I'm not really supposed to be doing this, but I just wanted to let you know that your guy has been arrested for carjacking a woman, and that woman works at your company. Wouldn't you know it?" The carjacking had taken place around the same time as his interview. The cop saw the company name and the guy's name and warned us, and I'm so grateful he did. At the time, I was a makeup artist that was flying to New York to work with a photographer. Right before the trip, communication dropped off completely. He wouldn't respond to Instagram or calls or emails either. A few weeks later, happened to catch his name in the paper. He had been arrested for a crime so awful that the narrator can't even say it on YouTube. Yep. Take it from me, folks, we can at least say the words for most of the world's crimes and offenses here, although we have to dance a little bit around the wording of ones where flirting goes way too far or the unspeakable act. But this one, I can't even talk about the subject matter in the most abstract terms. Suffice to say, it's sickening and awful, and this guy deserves to go away forever. Good resume. Former military, we were going to call him for an interview, but Googled him first. Turns out he was arrested for arms trafficking. The report said he'd stolen 2 or 3 small arms as well as a Stinger missile system from the base he was stationed at. The people he set up to sell the stuff to were undercover officers. I just asked the other manager if he remembered that guy's name so I could find the report. He didn't, but he reminded me that some of the stuff that was listed as being in his possession was a number of flak jackets and a Humvee. Years ago at my previous company, a few co-workers met a young man interested in a software development position with us at a local trade conference and invited him to come interview with us later that afternoon. Said fellow eagerly provided the link to his blog. Top post was about being recently released on probation after a stint for illicit substance sales and how his upstream supplier was kind enough to front him some startup capital and some new inventory to resume his little side gig, as his previous stash was allegedly confiscated during a previous visit by law enforcement. Co-workers and I decided to read a few more posts just to make sure we didn't confuse this guy with the wrong person and inadvertently got the wrong link to his blog or something. Sure enough, a few photos and some older posts confirmed it was the same guy. We didn't manage to get much additional work done for the rest of the afternoon between speculation as to when his apparent commitment to full public disclosure would land himself back in the clink and whether we ought to even mention having checked out his blog. We all had to try very hard to keep a straight face when he did come in for his interview. He actually was very reasonably knowledgeable when it came to the job, and somehow we'd managed to completely avoid the question of his side gig in recreational pharmaceutical sales. We gave him an A+ for honesty and an F for good sense. He was not extended an offer of employment. There was a time I was screening tenant applications for a room for rent. I had a bad roommate experience before, and I wanted to make sure I got the right fit for a tenant. I was exchanging emails with this nice lady who was eager to move. I explained to her the process and that a background check was needed to be done by our property manager. But I had this weird gut feeling about this lady, so I googled her name, and a bunch of arrest records popped up, including domestic disputes. That was a no for me, and I politely declined her application. I share my dad's name, so when you Google my name, you pull up his exploits, stuff like being arrested for having 7 semi-trucks worth of green herb in his driveway. Thanks, Dad. Had a guy come in to apply for a dumper truck job. Seemed okay, very well spoken, clean cut, not the kind you see usually applying for a job driving a dumper truck. He told me he had a PhD in psychology and had his own DWI and addiction counseling business, but his wife divorced him and he lost everything. So I googled him. He wasn't lying, but the story went a bit deeper than that. Turns out his wife had been cheating on him. When he found out where the boyfriend lived, he snorted almost enough white snow to give himself a heart attack, went to the guy's house where his wife's car was parked. He shot 30 rounds from an automatic weapon into the house and the car with them inside the house. Somehow he got off with only 6 months in jail and probation. He didn't get the job. I suppose you wouldn't hire him. How can you trust someone you can't even hit with a full mag to correctly meet all of his goals for that one job? We hired an ex-policeman as a technician in our trade field. He seemed willing and able, and he passed stringent background and driving backgrounds. He said he was wanting to be out of law enforcement because of the scrutiny officers were under and needed a career change. This guy looked like a cop. Anyway, he worked for a couple of months and did okay at his role, until we got a call saying he'd blacked out behind the wheel, crossed several lanes and medians and wrecked his company truck into a tree, and finally a house. We went to pick him up and assess the damage. The firefighters agreed it might be due to dehydration and no charges were filed. Then we Googled his name. This officer had been charged with DUI in the middle of the day a year prior for wrecking his cruiser in basically the same way. On that day, paramedics discovered he confessed to drinking whiskey all day during his patrol. The guy was an extreme but functioning alcoholic. Luckily, he was still inside his 90-day probation period, so termination was simple. The guy sent me his resume, but instead of sending it as an attachment, he emailed me a snapshot of his resume he'd stored in his photos. In the photos below it was him smoking doobies and drinking 40s with his friends. And no, I'm not against green herb or booze. My main priority is to protect the company, and the job entailed driving company vehicles, machinery, operating equipment, stuff like that. I can't knowingly hire someone who'll fail a P-test if he crashes, as the insurance company won't pay it. He was dismissed because he emailed me with a screenshot from his phone as a resume, not as an attachment. Also, his email said, "Hey, I saw this job on Craigslist. My number is this. I live here. Can I start ASAP? HMU." That was word for word, by the way. He was so well-spoken, he had big dreams, was tech-savvy. I was about to hire him on the spot. A Google search pulled up a mugshot for identity theft. We didn't hire him. I was interviewing a chef for my business. The interview went great. He had an excellent resume, worked at some of the top restaurants in the world, 3 Michelin star kind of places, even did a short cooking test with some spare ribs, and they were incredible. There was some stiff competition though, so eventually we decided to look at everyone's Facebook profiles. One of his old profile pics was him at Mardi Gras parade dressed as Pikachu with a big adult toy strapped on his front. So yeah, he got the job. I was head of HR for an answering service company at one point in my life. Staff turnover was atrocious, and most of the resumes that came through were from people that had 0 job history or were chronic job hoppers. Imagine my surprise when Renee's resume crossed my desk. With the exception of a 10-year gap on her resume, she appeared to be an ideal candidate. Then I found the articles from a newspaper about 2 hours away. That 10-year gap? Serving time for kidnapping and murder. With an axe. A literal frickin' axe murderer. I hired her, and as far as I know, she's still there. Model employee, strong work ethic, positive attitude. 10 out of 10 would hire an axe murderer again. We were narrowing the group down to 2 or 3 candidates. We then Googled, Facebooked, and LinkedIn'd them to get to the one that was in the top 2. Their Facebook was completely open to the public to view everything. Lots of racist, sexist comments, and risque photos of them in some highly compromising positions. That was too bad. Their resume was actually pretty good, just not something we'd consider appropriate for us. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.